What if you woke up as a minor villain in your favorite dark fantasy novel? That's exactly what happened to Han, who has no magic or any social skills, and a future that looks like a disaster waiting to happen. His only shot at survival is taming, a skill no one seems to take seriously. All he wants is to get through the academy in one piece. But can he actually change his fate? Or is trouble just around the corner? Let's find out. Reincarnation is a gamble. You could end up as a cockroach crawling on the ground, but landing as a human is like hitting the jackpot, and our protagonist just hit it. After working himself to death in his past life, he finally gets a fresh start as a human again. He finds himself in the body of Han Siha, a minor villain who gets killed in the first chapter from a dark novel he used to enjoy. Seeing the stats of this hopeless fool, our hero feels stuck in this doomed role and curses the roulette wheel for such a terrible choice. On top of that, his current setting is an auxiliary facility for dark mages, which worsens his reincarnation. Our hero can recall that Han Siha was once full of potential due to his natural magical abilities, but ultimately excluded at Ardell Academy for his lack of practical skills. Now, he is around some mysterious people who mentions he's a student from Ardell Academy and wonder if he could be useful. Our hero remembers that was the unfortunate time when Han Siha took interest in dark magicians and approached them. Just as our boy thought, one of the magicians finds him useful and tells him to follow along. As they walked, the magician asked if he knew how to join, which he said he did. Deep down, he was freaking out that killing a member and signing the oath for dark magic meant no going back. To make things worse, he knew the dark magician organization, including Han Siha, would be wiped out by the main character of the novel. He starts figuring out his escape plan. While he's stressing, a system prompt suddenly appears and warns him to get out immediately. Shocked by the unexpected outbreak, he freezes. A loud scream suddenly echoes through the facility. The magicians around him react and try to figure out what's happening in the basement, but give our boy a stern warning to stay put if he wants to live. As soon as they leave, he takes his chance and runs. He's running around without a clue where to go next. Completely worn out, he stops and complains about being lost. Ahead, he notices a locked door and a soft light approaching. As he pauses, a deep voice of a dark mage startles him. He ducks down and catches two guys chatting about a kid who got away from the third basement floor. Once they leave, our hero checks out his surroundings and tries to get the locked door open. It's not moving at all, no matter what. In frustration, our hero remembers Han Siha's magical abilities. Our protagonist focuses, trying to channel his magic into his fingertips to break the lock. It doesn't work and leaves him drained and hopeless. Just as he thinks things can't get worse, he hears something approaching. He turns and braces for the worst, but sees a little dragon. The dragon grabs his robe, wanting to be picked up. Our boy scoops it up and tells the dragon straight out that he can't take care of it. The little guy cries like a baby, which is impossible to ignore, so he gives in and takes it along. He runs while muttering about the dragon doing this on purpose and knows he is not cut out for this. He stops and decides to try the dragon's power. As he stares, his system pops up and unlocks his taming ability, asking if he wants to tame the little dragon, and shows its skills. It turns out the dragon has a flamethrower skill. When he sees that, he remembers some traits from his past life, but gets annoyed that there's no accept button on the system. He realizes he's going to have to tame the dragon just like Han Siha did back in the novel. As he gets the hang of it, he realizes he has decent experience and skill in taming. Using hand gestures, he builds trust and puts the little dragon at ease, telling it to trust him. Though worried if he is doing it right, the dragon warms up and floats into the air. As the dragon lands, our hero doubts whether he really has it under control, but decides to put it to the test. He tells the dragon to break the door lock. The dragon charges forward without hesitation. It jumps and bites through the chain lock, snapping it like it's nothing. He is stunned it was so easy. With the lock broken, they are ready to escape. He hears footsteps approaching and feels a bad vibe. When he glances back, the men spot him just as he's about to escape. Caught and unsure what to do, he recalls a basic spell of smog from Ardell Academy meant for hiding. But our boy has never tried before. With no options left, he takes a deep breath. He concentrates and imagines holding a gun as he channels energy into his fingertips and hopes the spell fills the cave with smoke. Thankfully it works, and he creates a small light at his fingertips. The magicians freeze for a moment while he quickly casts the spell, making a cloud of smoke wrap around them. Then he takes the chance to bolt for the door. But just as he's about to open it, a creepy ghost hand suddenly appears and grabs him by the neck. He's totally shocked and can't breathe as it chokes him, and he goes crashing to the ground. His pet rushes to his side as he wonders if this is the end. The magician sneers and says Han cannot escape and should be grateful for a painless death. As he lies there feeling defeated, he realizes how unfair it is to be brought back only to face death again. Just when all hope seems lost, he remembers one last trick. His pet clings to his robe as it senses his anxiety. He tells the dragon it must trust him if it wants to break free. He apologizes for his mistakes and asks for their help. The reptile spreads its wings and strides up to the spellcaster with a bold vibe and unleashes a massive burst of flames. The fire surrounds the guy and he screams in agony. The ghostly hand squeezing his neck vanishes and finally sets him free. Once the danger passes, the dragon returns to the boy. He didn't expect this outcome but feels grateful to have such a reliable companion. Our boy tells the dragon he owes it his life and promises to care for it. But first they need to escape. They trek through a scorching desert, searching for a cave to rest. Relieved to be free from the dark mages, our boy feels the heat and thirst wearing him down. Even the dragon looks exhausted as he vows to never let the mages catch him again. He spots a carriage and approaches the old driver, asking for a ride. The driver asks if he can pay. Without hesitation, our boy pulls a gold card from his pocket and asks if it's enough. The old man is surprised to see the card and recognizes it as one from Ardell Academy with special perks. After thinking for a moment, he agrees to let them ride. They thank him and settle into the carriage. As they get comfortable, the old man asks where they are headed. Our boy hesitates and realizes he ran without a plan. With dark mages likely after him, he decides his best option is Ardell Academy. It is a place where people might still want him dead, but is perfect for laying low, just like in the novel he read. Our guy's adventure begins at Ardell Academy, where we meet Selene, who is a second-year assistant professor. She admires the marble floors and the elegant chandeliers and finds the student uniforms very classy. Her smile fades when she sees our hero arrive covered in dust and looking worn out. Selene cannot believe someone so messy just walked into the spotless academy. She rolls her eyes and wonders how he even got in while he remains unaware of her annoyance. Selene is worried that this guy who struggles to control his natural magical abilities could mess up the academy's reputation right on the first day of the semester. Meanwhile, Han is keeping his dragon hidden in his robe, but the little guy is getting restless and really wants to get out. Our boy figures out she must be a professor, so he asks if he is late and she tells him he is. But she decides to brush him off as she remembers the rumors about Han Siha's strange obsession with black magic with life-size dolls and thinks he is just trouble, so she merely tells our hero to hurry up and get inside. He thanks her and walks inside as she reflects on how her perspective has changed as a second-year professor. Once he's in the room, his classmates start whispering and gossiping about him being weird since he shows up in a carriage and looks poor. Wee Boy tunes out all the noise around him, thinking he's probably on track to become that crazy villain everyone talks about. Sitting in the back, he catches bits of his classmates speculating that he must have gotten a leg up because a professor cut him some slack. He can't help but wonder if his family paid someone off for his advancement, if a professor actually sees something in him, or if some magic tower wrote him a glowing recommendation. His main focus is staying alive in this dark fantasy world using his skills. To survive, he sets 2 goals, starting with finding a quiet hiding spot. As a low-tier villain known for being violent and clueless, he risks a terrible fate like being buried alive by the hero. With the academy closed for the year, he has time to figure things out. He doesn't know why he died, but it might involve unresolved issues or unknown crimes. He'd rather try and fail than face that dark future. His backup plan is to graduate and secure his future. His wealthy family cut ties with him due to his past, so finishing at the academy is his best shot at a stable life. He decides to lay low by avoiding the main character and steer clear of trouble. When the professor walks in, our boy recognizes him as Professor Grint from the magic department. The professor praises the second years for their work, noting how the top student raises the bar and makes things harder for him. With students aged 14 to 19, the academy is highly competitive and only 10% graduate with high honors. This makes our boy wonder how he can compete with the main character's crazy power in the black magic group. Since he just wants to live a chill life, it feels almost impossible. The professor suddenly says that anyone who doesn't meet the standards can't join his class. Han's taken aback when the professor gives him this serious look, almost like he's under a spotlight. The professor shares the exam schedule and taps his walking stick, summoning an announcement illusion. Our guy is amazed by the advanced magic of the spell. The display explains that after a year, he can choose 3 subjects for written and practical exams. He's impressed by the academy's magic and likes having a choice but suspects it won't be as simple as it seems. The professor explains that only a few students can choose their subjects and it will be on a first-come first-served basis. He even offers to draw lots to decide the order. Our guy thinks it is unfair to leave his exam fate to chance. With no choice but to act quickly to save his grades, he feels like his luck ran out after dealing with those dark magicians. The professor takes out a ball and says that Han will be the first to choose. Our hero is caught off guard, feeling like maybe his luck isn't completely done for. He starts checking out the subjects and quickly realizes he should steer clear of anything too practical or linked to necromancy. As he scans the options, everything looks tough and he's really struggling to make a choice. But then he spots one that stands out: exploration of arithmetic and magic formulas. At first, it sounds super complicated, but he figures it's probably the easiest pick he's got. Plus, he knows he's decent at memorization, so he thinks he can handle it somehow. His friends talk about his subject choice and say arithmetic is the easiest option. They feel relieved he chose it since they are struggling. While they talk, he quickly selects his other two subjects. One of them seems manageable. He's studying quietly in the library, thinking back to his time as a vet intern. The subjects he chose remind him a lot of his veterinary science major. He starts with exploration of arithmetic and magic formulas, and realizes that the math here is totally different as his old formulas might not cut it anymore. After wrapping that up, he grabs another book to work on. He's so focused on studying that he totally forgets his pet in his bag. Other students start to get suspicious when his dragon tries to wiggle out. He quickly shoves it back down to avoid getting noticed. His little buddy wants to come out and play, but he keeps it hidden to avoid trouble. Bringing it along might help, but it would only create more problems. With the crowd around him, he decides to leave the library. Our hero knows dealing with magic and taming a baby dragon would draw too much attention. After leaving the library, he heads to the underground training area at the academy. He tells his dragon it can run free, thinking it's a perfect chance to try out his taming skills since he's gotten the hang of the theory. When he asks the staff member at the training ground for a ticket to the beginner area, she looks surprised at his dragon and comments on him bringing a dragon to the newbie zone. When she asks for the name, he realizes he has not named his pet yet. He asks the dragon for its name and it excitedly says Chime. He keeps thinking about a name, but the dragon gets annoyed because he does not understand. As he thinks, he suggests names like Drake and Charizard, thinking they are the coolest names ever. The dragon gets angry and signals it might roast him if he does not pick a good one. Seeing the reaction, he carefully picks a unique and fitting name and decides on Basilisk. Our hero notices that the dragon perks up when he hears the name Basilisk. The girl catches on and tells him the training area can fit 2 people, but there's already one person in the other room. Then, she takes them to the weapon room and explains it's a rental service for students like them. Our hero thinks the weapons look pretty lame, probably because they're free, but he decides not to complain since he wants to get stronger and should just be thankful for what he gets. He picks out a shield and a wand stick. The girl leads them to the beginner practice area and opens the gate. Our hero feels a mix of emotions as entering this place looks like a peaceful garden, which leaves him a little amazed. While exploring, he notices a slime and thinks how even low-level monsters seem kind-hearted here, though he does not feel the same way. He asks Basil if he can see the slimes, and when the pet says he can, our boy decides he will blow them up. Basil is taken aback by his master's cold order, but knows he has no choice. He goes ahead and takes down the block slimes while his master watches. As Basil starts to enjoy himself, his master realizes his dragon instincts are kicking in. He mutters under his breath about how the scared little dragon is gone as Basil tears through them all. He decides to level up his skills. While he's wandering around, he hears some creepy sounds and suddenly gets attacked. He spins around and manages to defend himself just in time. The block slime monsters are back for payback, and he realizes he can't take them all on with how strong he is right now. But with Basil's plan in mind, he's confident he can take them out one by one. Our boy asks Basil if he's ready and suggests trying their classic move. Basil jumps in and blasts the monsters with his flamethrower, wiping them out quickly. Impressed by Basil's power, the boy says they need to keep training to level up. After hours of training, they lie on the ground, completely exhausted. The boy mentions how taming Basil and casting spells has left him drained. Seeing Basil focused on him, he promises to get him a tasty treat back at the dorm. Meanwhile, Basil snoozes peacefully nearby. The boy notices something happening below and checks it out. He spots a student the girl mentioned earlier, training with her beast. The beast goofs around while the girl grows frustrated as it ignores her commands. While our guy watches, the girl tries to get her hellhound to behave. He thinks she's totally going about it all wrong and tells her she shouldn't be handling it that way. She's yelling at the beast to come back and sit, but it completely ignores her and takes off. She storms off to find her stubborn pet and grums that it's going to regret being caught. As she's searching, she notices that her wild beast has calmed down and is now sitting quietly with our hero. She's curious about how Han has managed to tame her pet so easily. When he spots her, our boy asks if that wild creature is hers and says he's been watching her struggles for a bit. He suggests that her way of taming the beast isn't quite right. She looks a little lost and deflated. Our boy explains that getting too emotional only makes the beast more restless. She's taken aback and can't believe Han is actually giving her tips. As she thinks about what he just said, she can't help but remember that Ardell Academy is the best school in the whole empire. Adele's an Earth Mage and has always been one of the top 3 students there. Even though she comes from a regular family and has had to deal with a lot of challenges, her skills are pretty much off the charts. So, it turns out that Adele ended up drawing the subject she totally struggles with for her lottery exams. Introduction to Basic Taming. She calls it bad luck, but deep down she knows she is not good at taming. That is why she is putting in the practice. What really throws her off is Han. Last year he could not even tame a slime and she watched him fail right in front of her. People say he's really into black magic and she thinks he's pretty moody and lost. But now, he's somehow gotten her wild hellhound to chill out and even be all cuddly with him. She can't believe it and asks how he pulled that off. Han just says the beast is calm now and it's hers again. She scoops it up and thanks him. Our boy asks her why she picked a hellhound, since it's a tough choice for a first-time tamer. She proudly says that taking on a tricky monster like that means a lot to her, especially since it's her first go at it. She wants to show what she can do. Getting her point, our boy jokes that he thought she'd want something a bit easier, like a pet that enjoys mud baths or something chill. Getting annoyed at his teasing, she fires back and reminds him of his past flops while she was busy taming her beast. Adele can't help but think about Han as he talks to her so easily. Even though she's just a commoner and he's a noble, her gaze shifts to the little dragon next to him. It's impressive that he's already managed to tame it, especially for a second-year student. Han seems like he's really changed. They head over to where the block slimes are, and Adele double-checks to make sure it's the right spot. Han suggested it so she could practice and bond with her beast. After he gives her the thumbs up, she dives in and starts clearing away vines and grass to reach the slimes. Han says he almost took them out before, but they keep popping back up. Adele tells him not to worry and that she'll take care of it. She asks him to give her a moment to get ready to deal with the slimes. The slimes attack the moment they spot her, but Adele takes them all out with one swing, leaving a huge mark behind. Han is impressed but can't resist teasing her, saying her technique looks like she's burying the slimes alive. Adele gets annoyed but acts like she's ignoring him. While a single slime is still hanging around, it suddenly moves to attack her. To her surprise, Han casts a spell at the slime out of nowhere. She's shocked because she totally remembers him not being able to use magic at all. Han then casually asks if she didn't notice the slime coming back for her. Still a bit stunned, she pretends like she was totally aware of the situation. As he starts to walk away, he comments that it's a relief if she knows what's going on. But as he strolls off, Adele realizes something. She actually didn't sense the slime creeping up from behind. Plus, she can see that Han's spell and magical arrow are way more accurate than she'd expect from someone just starting out. Their boy starts to say something, but he's interrupted when an unexpected error hits the dungeon, setting off an alarm that blares through the whole place. Both of them jump into action. He quickly asks her if she knows of anything that might have triggered it, but she's just as clueless. Meanwhile, a guy in the principal's office is telling the honorary principal that there's a situation in the training dungeon. The principal then asks what's going on inside and which students are in there. The guy fills him in about Han and Adele being around. The principal lets out a sigh and mentions that Han is nothing but trouble. He hints that losing Han wouldn't be a big deal, but when it comes to Adele, it's a whole different story. She's got talent and a bright future ahead, so her safety really matters. He points out that Han doesn't have any skills and is likely to struggle in such a dangerous dungeon. If there's a problem with the dungeon's magic setup, the monsters can end up way bigger and a lot tougher than they normally are. He stresses that Han really doesn't stand a chance and suggests the staff get ready for what could happen. Back in the dungeon, Han and Adele are holding their own for now and manage to take down a bunch of slime monsters. But these things just keep coming, and it feels like they're never going to stop. Adele groans, saying the monsters are getting creepier and this whole place feels like total hell. Frustrated, she shouts that the slimes won't quit showing up and swears she'll never look at a slime again. While she's freaking out, Han can't help but find it a bit funny as he watches her. He notices that even though Adele looks totally worn out from the non-stop monster waves, she still seems to be holding it together surprisingly well. He thinks that even though her taming skills aren't the best, her sword fighting is just as good as the pros. It makes him wonder if she might be the Earth Mage who's set to become an awesome sorcerer. Still, it's pretty strange to see someone as tough as her hanging out in a beginner's training area like this. Earth Mages getting called Mage Swordsman isn't a big deal. Han's actually impressed by the girl's personality. She's got a bit of a temper, but she doesn't look down on him at all. While he's lost in his thoughts, Adele catches him slacking off and handling the monsters all on her own. She thinks he's kind of a creep and wants to know why he's just nodding to himself instead of jumping in to help. Han can't believe they've been stuck there for over 3 hours without a single word from the outside. He wonders if anyone even knows they're in trouble, which might explain why no one's come to help. She responds that it is what it is since only about 30 minutes have actually passed outside, so time moves slower in here. She looks at the whole mess as a chance for them to get in some extra training, trying to figure out why there's been no response yet. He says that even if they know what's going on and come to rescue them, they still have to last several hours. They need to hang in there and keep battling the slime monsters until help shows up, which feels pretty hopeless. When she hears Han's words, she gets mad and snaps at him for saying such negative stuff like they are just waiting around to die. Han responds with sarcasm and says he would never say something like that, clearly enjoying himself. As they argue, he tells her to buy him some time. She's confused and asks what he's up to, but Han just tells her she'll find out when the moment comes. He reminds her to keep the slime monsters at bay because he doesn't need long to do what he has to do. She freaks out a bit and asks why she has to handle it solo and what he's planning to do while she's on slime duty. But Han just brushes her off and jumps into his plan. Basil is feeling a bit anxious about Adele, but Han reassures him that he's got everything under control. As he walks along, he spots these glowing vines lighting up the area. He mentions he's read about them in the story and knows how to handle them. In the original novel, the Error Dungeon really emphasizes how different Lee Han's abilities are compared to Han Siha. Han really struggled with this part of the dungeon before, dealing with those annoying vines. But now he's stoked to find them and tells Basil to gather more. Basil looks around and then zips off to find the rest. While he waits, Han complains about how readers always criticize him for using this tactic and call him a loser and a bad guy. As he holds a unique vine, he mutters to himself that he does not deserve all that hate. Adele is holding her own against the slime, but she's starting to run low on mana. She's getting worried about why Han is taking so long and can't help cursing him a bit in frustration. Just then, Han bursts in yelling that he is finished. Adele turns around and looks a bit puzzled when she sees him with those mysterious vines as if he has built some kind of barricade. She motions for him to hurry inside, suggesting they keep it low-key since the slimes are bouncing back fast. But Han insists she get inside right away. He shares his idea of building a wall to hold them off and take out the monsters outside. With some amplification magic and fire, he thinks he can stop the slimes from healing and make them vanish. He casts a spell and makes this big green arrow using arrow magic. Then he mentions that all that's left to do is light the arrows on fire. Turning to Basil, he says it's his turn now. Basil's eyes light up again as he sets the arrows ablaze. Han then shoots the flaming arrows out past their barricade. The slime monsters notice the glowing arrows, and out of nowhere, they blow themselves up in a huge explosion. Adele watches in awe as Han shows off his creation, struggling to wrap her head around the fact that this is really the Han she knows. The slimes are disappearing and not coming back, so she asks him how he managed that. Han explains that when he buried the slimes and spread their remains around, their poison would explode if fire magic touched it. She then wonders if he has a plan to keep the fire rain from getting through their barricade. Han nods and says that is a good point, but their barricade vines are special since they can withstand fire and will not burn. With everything ablaze around them, all they need to do now is wait for their rescue. Since things seem to be settling down, Han feels a bit of relief. Adele can't help but think about how unlikely it is that someone like him would actually save her. Nobles at Ardell Academy usually ignore commoners, so she starts to wonder if Han has some hidden agenda. Meanwhile, Han is also puzzled by the way she's looking at him. He figures she'll thank him for saving her. Adele might come off as grumpy, but she's got a good heart and manages to say she's a bit grateful since he kind of saved her life. Han smiles and says that's great, then asks if she could do him a favor. Adele looks a bit worried, trying to guess what the favor might be. She thinks she will go for it if it is something simple, but she is not interested if it is something odd. Before she can finish her thoughts, Han asks her to keep everything under wraps from taming the beast to catching the error slime and building the barricade. Adele figured out she was right about her guess, but something still felt off. She couldn't shake the feeling that Han was hiding something and thought he seemed a bit shady as she watched him pick up some slime orbs. The whole dungeon cleanup part was pretty much brushed aside. The two professors were clearly baffled by the sudden mistakes, but decided to reward the students for handling things without anyone getting hurt too badly. Later, Han was summoned to the dean's office for a big reward. Sitting there, he looked relieved and mentioned that he understood the value of rewards, but that they were not really his thing. He was way more focused on getting stronger himself and helping his cute beast level up. With the dean away, Han and Basil are hanging out alone. Han checks on Basil and discovers he's a red dragon now. Basil's flamethrower skill leveled up, and he even got toxic resistance after that dungeon glitch. Han is a bit puzzled about what the Dark Magician group is up to, but since Basil came from the basement, it is clear they are involved somehow. Han gives Basil some props for being a talented hatchling with serious growth and magic skills. He's determined to train him right, even if it takes a lot of work. Then, he shows Basil a slime orb and explains it's a powerful item. He asks Basil if it looks tasty and jokingly suggests giving it a try. Basil looks a bit unsure, like he thinks it might be poisonous. Even though the dragon is hesitant too, Han manages to persuade him to give it a shot by promising that it tastes amazing and that eating a couple won't hurt him. After some back and forth, Basil finally goes for it. Unfortunately, he ends up puking from the terrible taste, which Han admits he hasn't tried himself. Still, Han notices that Basil's magic power and resistance to toxins have actually gone up after munching on the orb. The slime orb really amps up your stats and even speeds up basic mana growth that usually takes forever. Basil notices the difference and gets totally hooked on the orbs. He just keeps eating them, and his stats shoot up fast. Han's just chilling, watching all this. Go down and feel pretty happy about it. Then out of nowhere, Adele bursts in and says she has been searching everywhere for Basil and finally found him in the dean's office. She asks if he's seriously cool with her taking all the credit for handling the error slime, since that would make her way more famous and snag her some sweet rewards. Han scratches his head and says he doesn't really care, just asking her to keep it down since it's hurting his ears. He mentions that life is way more important than stuff, and warns that clearing the dungeon could draw the attention of the Dark Organization, putting him at risk. Plus, he doesn't want to be as famous as the protagonist. Adele responds that if that's the case, he should just keep it to himself because she's not looking for fame either. Han questions why she's being so sympathetic, and bluntly tells her he doesn't need pity from someone he barely knows, asking her not to bring it up. Adele's fuming and wants to know how he's never heard of her. He throws in a sarcastic remark about why he should even care and asks for her name. When she says it's Adele Svea, his mouth drops open. He suddenly realizes she's the amazing magician from a regular background who's always in the top 3 at the academy. The same girl who buries him alive in the story is now standing right there, asking if he knows her. He starts freaking out, thinking the person in front of him is going to kill him in the future. He feels like he's hit the jackpot of bad luck running into her, and can't stop overthinking, mumbling that this bad vibe is driving him nuts. Adele picks up on his panic and asks if he ever checks himself out in the mirror. She drags him over to one so he can see himself. She laughs and says she can't believe someone like him would show up at the dean's office just to grab something. When he sees his reflection for the first time since being brought back to life in Han's body, he's pretty shocked by how dirty and ragged he looks. It's hard to believe he doesn't resemble the handsome guy he thought he would. After realizing that people are not avoiding him out of fear but because they cannot stand the sight of him, he decides to stay positive. He decides it is time to make some changes, starting with fixing his hair and cleaning himself up. The next day, our guy struts into the classroom like he owns the place. His classmates start whispering with some thinking he is a new transfer because he looks so good, while others recognize him as Han, but cannot believe how different he is now. As they gossip, he cracks a joke about being so good-looking that everyone can't help but talk about him. One classmate even asks if he got some sort of makeover and wants to know his secret. Han could not believe that Crick, the annoying red-haired commoner, was trying to boss him around. Since Han was not the real one, he refused to let himself be pushed around. Crick kept mocking him and calling him a loser, but Han ignored it completely. Things took a turn when Crick started accusing him of losing it after getting a haircut. Han calmly told him to shut up or get shut down because he was over it. Crick argued that he had every right to talk, especially since Han's family had ditched him. Han shot back, telling Crick to quit pretending he was so tough. Just then, Basil popped out of Han's bag, radiating a serious vibe and an icy chill. The tension between them makes Han nervous, as his classmates are shocked by his beastly presence. Crick keeps mocking him, but our boy fires back and says it is a shame Crick picked the wrong guy to mess with. As Crick gets angrier, our hero smirks and enjoys watching him lose his cool. He turns the tables and says even a dragon hatchling can make a difference because it is all about skill and not size. He warns Crick that if something happens to him, there is no coming back. Crick is super frustrated and tells our hero he needs to know his place. As Crick gets more annoyed, our boy decides to challenge him to wait for the exam results to see who's really the better one. Crick is totally caught off guard by this challenge. After class, our hero can't help but remember Crick's bold claim that he'd bark like a dog if he lost. Now all our hero has to do is sit tight and wait for that to go down. This reminds him of his old life where he was known for being great at fixing his own messes, which is why people used to call him the scumbag intern. He always stood up against injustice and never let anyone beat him. Feeling proud of himself, he suddenly gets interrupted by his classmates. They ask if he is really planning to take down Crick this time, joking that he would be lucky just to pass. They laugh and ask how he even dares to challenge Crick in the exam, acting like he is kidding himself. They cannot wait to see him fail and bark like a dog. Our hero stays chill, thinking it's the same story everywhere. People like them just can't let others be, even when they're doing fine. He then looks over at a blonde guy and asks for his name. The blonde looks a bit nervous and wonders why it matters, but Han interrupts and insists he explains. The blonde doesn't have much choice, so he says his name is Edwin. When Han hears this, it clicks in his mind that Edwin is the arrogant prince who uses his status to boss around weaker people, and is the leader of the bullies who have been messing with him. Without wasting any time, Han digs into his bag and pulls out his tame dragon. Edwin couldn't believe his eyes when he saw it. He totally didn't expect the little guy to turn it against him. The little dragon lunges at him, catching Edwin and his friends off guard, and they quickly bail, leaving him yelling for help. Then the scene shifts to a hallway where Adele walks up to him. She brings up the latest rumors flying around and warns him that it's probably a good idea not to mess with royalty. She specifically mentions a boy named Edwin that he had just bullied. Han says he doesn't really care since they were the ones who started all of this. and he's just giving them a taste of their own medicine. She used to think he was just a bully with a noble title, but now she wonders if he might be more like an imperial prince who lashes out at anyone he doesn't like. Still, she finds him a bit more bearable and calls him hopeless. As she gets closer, she asks if all nobles are completely clueless. She points out how he made his dragon go after the bullies, threw down a random bet with Crick, and is planning on beating him in some kind of test. She reaches out her hand and says he's lucky she stepped in to help, because who knows what could have happened otherwise. Han talks about how she's figuring out her timing with his beast, while he's helping her get a better grip on her magic. She brushes it off and suggests they dive into some training. She even bets that if he can take her down, it means he might actually stand a chance against Creek. He confidently responds that he'll totally beat Creek. They kick off their match, with Adele hitting him first with a spell. Han blocks it with a quick barrier. All that serious training leads to a huge explosion. Time flies, and the day of the entrance exam is finally here. Once she wraps up her test, Adele finds out her results. The professor tells her she finished the magic exam in just 5 minutes and 31 seconds and hooks her up with an A. Adele can't help but smile and thanks the professor. Han watches her celebrate and thinks to himself that even though his past life gives him a bit of an advantage, there's no denying Adele's talent. The way she tamed that beast was seriously impressive. She's definitely a prodigy, a main character all on her own. As he thinks about it, the professor calls up Han for his exam. Han steps into the magic cube for the beast taming challenge and finds out he's going to face a virtual monster that matches the level of his tamed creature. The goal is to win the fight. He chooses Cube C and lets them know he's ready. Suddenly, a huge serpent appears, filling the area with an eerie vibe. It's an Adaptrion, a monster Han first ran into during his 3rd year. Its massive size and power make it clear that one hit from it could be dangerous, just like the novel said. Han reassures Basil, telling him not to freak out and that he probably wants this challenge just as much as he does. Even though his dragon looks a bit jittery, Han reminds him how much stronger he's become after munching on all those slime orbs, and just tells him to have fun with the fight. Basil seems to be feeling a bit more confident. The battle kicks off, and Han tells Basil to get up close to the serpent since it can't see well. He's planning to use himself as bait to grab its attention while he gets ready to cast a spell. Han reminds Basil to stay sharp because the serpent could hit them both hard if it attacks fully. As Han distracts it with his magic, Basil sneaks into its blind spot and blasts it with his flamethrower, taking the beast down instantly. The serpent crashes to the ground, shaking the cube room. The professor is stunned, wondering how Han's young dragon hatchling could take down the powerful Adaptrion in just one hit. Han steps out of the cube room to find a crowd buzzing with excitement over his win. He thinks the orb slime's effect is working really well and asks the professor if he passed. He humbly mentions it took him a bit of time, but he managed to pull it off. The professor announced that Han finished the test in 12 minutes and 36 seconds, scoring an S grade. Han is left in total shock. As the exam wraps up, Han and Adele stroll out together. She tells him he snagged an S grade and is pretty sure he'll be ranked first in their section. Han feels happy about it, but he's also stressing a bit since he just wants to land around 15th place to keep things low-key. This could totally throw a wrench in his plans. Adele sees that he's looking a bit down and jokes that he worries way too much, saying he might end up a psychopath. Then she switches gears and asks how he felt about the arithmetic test, reminding him that their rankings are based on their average scores. He says the questions were a breeze, but kind of admits he only got Juan's question right on purpose. Adele agrees she messed up too, and grumbles that the tests were way too hard for her to do well. Remembering she struggles with math, Han jokes around a bit and shows off. Adele shifts the topic, mentioning how some problems weren't even covered in class. That gives Han a moment of pause, and he asks if it really mattered if he missed Juan's question before suddenly taking off. Adele wonders what he's getting at, and warns him that losing the top spot might cost him the scholarship. She casually asks him if he figured out question 27, the one about the magic circle. He says he thinks he did. Adele looks surprised, and Han asks if he messed something up. She says she could be wrong and wonders if he's really sure about it. Turns out he actually solved question 27, the one she and their classmates couldn't figure out. He's taken aback by this. He didn't think it was that big of a deal. It's weird to him since he thought it was the easiest question on the whole test. If it turns out he got it right, he's worried his name might start getting thrown around everywhere. In Professor DeBert's office, Professor Selen shares the scores and mentions that only one student got question 27 right. DeBert is taken aback since he thought it was impossible to solve and asks who managed it. Selen reveals it was Han and points out that all his other answers were purposely wrong, guessing he cracked that one just to show off. Honestly, Han stumbled upon the solution by chance. Professor DeBert remembers him as the top performer from the Taming exam and thinks Han someone who really plans for the future. But even though Han would rather have a chill life, it seems like fate has other plans for him. The next day, the rankings are posted, and a crowd gathers around the bulletin board. Han first checks Crick's rank, and as usual, he's sitting at 32nd. Then suddenly the crowd starts whispering. Han is completely taken aback when he sees that he's ranked 11th. Crick looks super panicked by the surprise results and seems ready to bolt. Han calls out to him and tells him to stick with him. As they walk away, the other students whisper even more. Some are cheering for Han and saying he moved up to 11th place, while others are making fun of Crick and saying he is headed for a fall. They mock him for being so arrogant. Crick feels embarrassed and can't even look Han in the eye. Han asks him what 1 plus 10 is. Crick fumbles his words and says it's 2, totally flustered. Han shakes his head and laughs as he points out that the answer is 11, just like his rank. Crick's face goes bright red as Han teases him, calling him 32nd place boy. Crick tightens his fists annoyed while Han grins, believing Crick still falls for the jabs. Han playfully flicks Crick's forehead, deciding to let it slide this time. Crick, taken aback, shouts, asking why he just got hit when that wasn't part of the agreement. Han shrugs and says it's just a little payback for all the trouble Crick caused by bullying other guys. Crick wants to argue, but Han cuts him off, saying they should meet later in the empty club room in the basement for some privacy. When Crick asks why, Han just says there's something he needs him to do and tells him to think it over. He adds that he'd prefer not to make Crick look like a fool in front of everyone, but Crick might want to think about his options. Crick gets really mad and starts demanding answers, but Han calmly asks if he knows his dad. Crick thinks he knows Han Tai, the Blood Count who started the Ardell Empire and took down dark magicians during the Dark Magic War. He figures Han is just trying to flex his noble status to scare him. Han is not the real deal but asks because he is genuinely clueless. He tells Crick to spread some rumors. When Crick asks what he means, Han whispers something that leaves Crick completely shocked. His jaw drops and he cannot believe Han is serious. Han confirms it and tells him to spread the word quickly. Crick calls him a crazy bastard as he walks away. In Han Tai's office, a butler mentions his son. Han Tai calls him pathetic and doesn't seem interested, too focused on his work. The butler says Han is struggling financially and going hungry since Han Tai stopped supporting him, except for tuition and boarding. Han Tai brushes it off, saying the hardship will help his son regain his memory. As Han distracts it with his magic, Basil sneaks into its blind spot and blasts it with his flamethrower, taking the beast down instantly. The butler looks pretty anxious and tells Han Tai that his son might be a different person now. He drops the bombshell that Han scored 11th on the promotion exam, which totally shocks Han Tai. The butler goes on to say that people are now calling the young master compassionate, upright, and handsome. Han Tai is really confused by this sudden change and starts grilling the butler. He wonders if his son might be blackmailing someone to make those rumors happen. The butler tells him that the rumors are actually true. Han Tai feels a bit skeptical, remembering when his son messed around with black magic and how he regrets his tough approach to getting his memories back. Still, it's kind of good news since his son is the one set to inherit the Castica estate. He gets excited and announces that if his son joins the magic department at the upcoming promotion ceremony, he'll restore all the financial support he cut off. The scene shifts to an ATM that's like a magic machine, and our guy can't believe his eyes when he checks his exam results. He finds out that some of the allowance he thought was gone has actually been returned. He's shocked by how much it is and realizes he can totally survive for the whole semester with that. Feeling grateful for his dad's honor and pumped that his little scheme worked, he's totally patting himself on the back for being so clever. Just as he's soaking it all in, Adele gives him a call. She asks him what he's up to and says it's time to head to the auditorium for their promotion ceremony. They walk there together, and as Han strolls down the hallway, he starts to remember bits from the original novel. At Ardell Academy, second-year students are sorted into different departments based on their strengths. The magic department covers a bunch of magical skills and provides plenty of hands-on experiences. The natural science department mixes magic with research and experiments, along with some academic stuff. The theology department dives into the spiritual side of magic, like prophecy and divination. Finally, the necromancy department is all about black magic and combat spells. The Dean Ernest just announced that the promotion ceremony is starting soon. He told the students to come up on stage when their name is called and put their hands on the magic dice. It'll figure out what they're naturally good at and decide their major. In the original book, Han ends up in the necromancy department because he wants to use dark magic to get back at all those people who have looked down on him. But that wish leads him to a pretty rough defeat. Now, he's wondering if these magic dice will end up giving him the same bad luck. Even though he's changed a bit, he knows that his recent choices aren't exactly good. Still, he's hoping he won't end up like the Han from the novel. The dean calls out Li Han's name, the top student who's aiming for the magic department. As Li walks to the stage, all his classmates hype him up, saying how cool he is. Our main guy thinks Li is like the hero of Seoul Academy, and cannot shake the feeling that Li's look is too perfect, like there is some kind of cheat code involved. He wishes he could be the main character too, daydreaming about being a handsome guy. Li places his hand on the magic dice, and it starts to glow. The dean announces that Lee's headed to the magic department. As he watches, Lee realizes Han will probably end up there too. You can kind of tell Lee saw this coming. Then the dean calls out for Solia, the next student. When Solia walks in, our guy remembers her as the awesome Mage of Light and one of the main character's friends. The dean says she's heading to the magic department, which he totally expected. They keep going through the assignments based on rankings. The standout top student Seymour Parker gets assigned to necromancy, while Yun ends up in the theology department. Our guy is taking in the whole scene, totally blown away to see all these familiar names and characters around him. When they call his name, he is thinking about what might happen in 3 years. Perhaps the necromancy department starts a rebellion against the academy, but gets defeated by the main crew. As he touches this magic dice thing, he really hopes he won't get stuck in necromancy. Meanwhile, his classmates are over there gossiping about him and his supposed ties to black magic. When the device lights up, the dean looks totally shocked and announces that Han is placed in the magic department. He feels a huge wave of relief that he avoided necromancy while his classmates find it hard to believe. As he walks off the stage, he is annoyed by their curious and suspicious glances, especially from those interested in black magic. Adele gives him a thumbs up, saying they'll probably bump into each other in the magic department. He kinda thought she'd end up there too. When he asks if she is excited about him being in the magic department, she nods with a sweet and cute look that makes him blush. He quickly covers his face with his hand, feeling shy about it. Noticing his reaction, Adele asks if something's up. He tells her it's all good and suggests she should give him a heads up next time she comes over. Adele is kinda confused by that, but their chat gets cut off when Lee shows up. He says what's up to our guy and mentions he wants to be friends since they'll be in the same department. Our guy feels a bit weird about Lee being so friendly and starts to wonder what he's really after. Lee seems a bit suspicious of him, pointing out that it's kind of weird he's suddenly interested in the magic department when he wasn't before. With a relaxed handshake, Lee mentions he's looking forward to teaming up. With no other option, our guy shakes his hand. Lee adds quietly that he heard they're stuck in the dungeon before the practical exam. Han can't believe what he's hearing. Lee goes on to say that even with Adele around, a regular student wouldn't have made it out of the error dungeon. Now he's really curious about what kind of magic our guy pulled off. Our hero is surprised that Lee knows about it, especially since the professor is trying to keep it quiet. Han admits that Lee is very detail-oriented, which makes it hard to figure out what he is really thinking. On top of that, Lee has a strong personality and is basically the classic main character. He is the type who believes any bad guy needs to be taken down. Our boy starts wondering if Lee already thinks he's part of some dark magic group and is checking in to see if he's a danger. Then the scene changes. He heads to his room, pondering the buzz that the academy just built a new dorm that's practically got 5-star hotel vibes. When he finally finds his room and swings the door open, he's totally caught off guard to see a guy inside who looks just as shocked to see him. The young kid shouts in shock, asking if he's really Han Si-ha while pointing at him. Han looks a bit puzzled and asks why he seems so blown away to see him. He grins and says he is thrilled to have a roommate who is a total superstar. He is the famous student who made Crit cry and even had royalty in tears. Hearing what Han said made our boy feel kinda awkward. It reminded him of the time Fabian Edwin started acting tough after the promotion ceremony. He questioned why someone like him, a royal, was into necromancy while our boy was in the magic department. To throw him off, our boy let slip that Fabian isn't really pure-blooded royalty. Fabian was shocked and asked how he knew. But our boy just rolled his eyes, telling him to pipe down and keep it down, hinting that he wasn't going to spill his secret. So Fabian backed off and apologized for causing any trouble. Fabian's feeling pretty low and complaining that he doesn't belong in the magic department, all while tearing up. Han tells him to knock it off and calls him an idiot, worried that their classmates might see. But it's already too late. The other students start whispering, saying Han was way too mean for making Fabian cry. Han's fuming, thinking his whole plan to keep a low profile and graduate smoothly is now ruined. Back in the dorm, the guy can't help but think about the mixed reactions he's been getting. The boy introduces himself as One and mentions he's also in the magic department. One gives him a friendly nod and says he knows Han is kind of a big deal but hasn't heard of him before. But our boy knows exactly who One is. He is one of Lee's most trusted sidekicks with a sharp mind and versatile skills. He also has a killer info network. One notices that our boy looks a bit off and asks if something's up. He just lets out a sigh, thinking about how unlucky he feels running into all these main characters. He mutters something about plots to take him out as Han but quickly brushes it off, saying it's nothing. One isn't buying it though. To lighten things up, One suggests they check out the dorm after unpacking. He mentions he has a guide map and insists it'll be fun to explore together as roommates. Han is a bit unsure but ultimately decides to go for it. While they're at the dorm's cafeteria, One brings up some chatter from the upperclassmen saying it's way better to eat outside. Han asks why, and One explains that the cafeteria food is terrible because it tastes like weird experiments gone wrong, so nobody eats there. He mentions that the students are so fed up with it that they've actually complained. Han quickly decides he's not going to eat there either. After complaining about the cafeteria, they make their way to the magic training field where the practice never stops. One tells him to watch where he's going, or he might get smashed and end up in the infirmary. Our guy suggests setting up a magic barrier, and One agrees with the idea, praising him for being smarter than people think while also teasing him a little. Feeling annoyed but trying to brush it off, our guy suggests they check out the field. While Juan keeps running his mouth, he notices that even though some of the stuff he says is pointless, there's actually a lot of useful info mixed in. One even admits that his comments can be helpful. After wandering around, One thinks it's time to head back to their room. Just then, the sky turns dark and it seems like rain is coming. Han quickly realizes this isn't ordinary rain but something poisonous and deadly. He pulls One to a stop and urges him to head to the main building to let their professor know what's up. One is feeling a bit off and confused about why Han suddenly stopped. The other guy observes the eerie scene as the rain drenches the muddy lawn, every drop filled with deadly poison. Chaos erupts among the students as word spreads to stay inside because the rain is poisonous. Things get even more tense when some notice that people are missing, including Adele and Solia. Seeing the chaos, our hero suspects the Black Magician organization is behind it and plans to kidnap talented students as hostages to take over the academy. He realizes this might be the start of the dormitory kidnapping incident. The system tells him the main goal of episode 4 is to save and help his future wives survive. Just kidding. The real task is to find and rescue the missing students. It also warns that failing will cost him handsomeness points, but since he has no points to lose, he simply ignores it. Adele and Solia are sitting in the forest, all tied up inside a tree. Adele is struggling to get free, but Solia tells her to chill out and save her energy. She explains that these vines are pretty tough to break. Solia's been searching for a weak spot, but she hasn't found one yet. Adele can't help but wonder why this guy in the black robe has trapped them in this tree. She feels like she hasn't done anything wrong to end up here, and definitely doesn't see herself as someone worth targeting. Unlike Solia, who has everything going for her, Adele is just an ordinary person without any family support. It's kind of like when she was stuck with Han in that error dungeon. The thought of his face popping into her mind as a last resort frustrates her even more. Why is she thinking about him when he is probably just lounging in his dorm? Solia notices the tree outside and suggests it might be weak to light since the sky looks like it's covered in black mist. Adele agrees, remembering that was the last thing they saw before getting trapped. Solia points out that those dark clouds seem like they're artificially blocking the sunlight, especially with that huge tree trunk sticking up into the sky. She adds that places like this usually let in sunlight unless there's a good reason not to. Adele gives her props for figuring that out so quickly. Solia says she's ready to fight back, pointing out that the toxic rain falling on everyone is definitely black magic. She mentions that her purification skill is a type of light magic and the best way to combat it. Adele knows Solia's skill is powerful, but isn't sure it'll actually help in this situation. With a sigh, Solia starts chanting a spell. As light begins to wrap around her, Adele starts to think that maybe this much light could really do the trick. Suddenly, a voice cuts in and tells them to stop fooling around. Jumps as the tree comes to life and attacks, breaking her spell. She looks hurt and totally drained. The tree laughs at her, reminding her that no matter how much potential she has, she's still just a second year and way too weak to take them on. It releases a thick black fog that makes it hard for Solia to breathe, and it's starting to mess with her mind. The tree makes her an offer that's hard to resist, hinting that it can bring back everything she's lost. It goes on about how much she's been through since joining the academy and how close she is to breaking. The tree promises Solia its power to help her make it through and get back home, making the deal sound way too good to pass up. With the fog messing with her head, Solia finds it tough to think straight. Adele jumps in and tells Solia to get it together. She reminds her that they've both had their share of tough times, but need to keep pushing forward. Then she squares off against the tree and asks why it went for Solia first instead of her. She's curious if it thinks she's an easy target. The tree looks like it's impressed by her fighting back against the fog and drops a hint that their talent is why the organization has its eyes on them. Then it throws out a deal. Adele figures that the tree fixated on her might give Solia a chance to pull herself together. She thinks the fog is using some mind tricks to mess with their desires and wear them down. If she can just hold on through willpower, she may be able to beat it. When the tree starts claiming it will expose her desires, Adele snaps back and refuses to believe it's nonsense. She really hopes Solia will come around soon, so she decides to buy some time by egging on the tree. She challenges it to come out from hiding and face her, calling it a coward. Angered by her insults, the tree attacks with its roots and insists it can defeat Adele in its current form. As the attack rushes toward her, Adele shuts her eyes and braces for what feels like the end while secretly hoping for a miracle. Then, out of nowhere, Our guy shows up and unleashes a crazy powerful spell that sends a beam of light straight at the tree. The light sparks some hope in Adele, and she's blown away by how the magic looks a lot like Solia's light magic. But when she glances over, she realizes Solia is still out cold. When our boy struts in, Adele is shocked to see Han. She can't believe he found them and pulled off such a strong light spell. Han jokes about how she's talking so much after almost biting the dust. He explains that the light was just a simple spell, pumped up with a magical magnifier from their bag. Then he checks on Adele, who sarcastically says she's all good, and asks if he thinks she's a loser like him. Jokes aside, our hero is. He suggests they team up to take on the fight while he holds her sword. Adele's pretty stoked to be holding onto the sword from their training days. She's touched by Han's thoughtfulness. But then he cracks a joke about her wanting to bury it somewhere. That bothers her slightly, but she brushes it off and says, there is no point in holding back now since they are up against a black mage. Then, a guy in a black robe limps out from behind a tree, looking like he's in a lot of pain. Han jokes about whether this tree is really the dude's true form. Our hero asks the guy why he's giving him such a nasty glare and if he wants to end up losing his other eye too. The guy gets really angry and uses the roots to take down Han. Instead of just hitting him, the roots rise up and rearrange the whole area to give him the upper hand. As he starts to regain his strength, he says it's Han's turn to vanish and tells the dark roots to go after him. Meanwhile, the smog swirls around our hero, creeping into his head and filling it with toxic whispers. It taunts him, calling him a useless student who will never graduate and says he's been ditched by his family. The voice tries to convince him that he's actually better off with black magic. Han brushes off the weak mental attack and asks if that's serious all the guy's got. This leaves him totally stunned. He figures out that the man is trying to use Hansiha's memories to get a rise out of him, but it's not working. The guy gets more and more frustrated and demands to know why his brainwashing magic isn't doing anything. Our boy calls the guy weak, which just makes him more furious. He sees that the dude has fused with the tree, basically becoming one with it. Han remembers that the huge baobab tree is actually an ancient lattice tree, a mix created by black mages to boost brainwashing magic and mental strength. But Han knows the solution is easy since monsters like this are way too reliant on their mental powers, making them pretty physically weak. He yells to Adele, wondering if he's got it right that the other tree is weak against light. He also mentions that trees usually don't do well against fire, making Adele question where he's going with this. Out of nowhere, our boy calls for his pet. The guy gets furious and demands to know how he dares to do that. Then, he sends the tree's branches flying at Han, but Basil fires back with a huge blast of flames, burning the tree roots to a crisp. A branch crashes into them, but Han quickly checks on Basil and feels relieved the hit wasn't too bad, leaving Basil okay. More branches fly at him and he can't believe how close they get. When they're about to hit, someone cuts through them. It's Adele, standing there and teasing that he owes her one. Han laughs, admitting he thought he was done for. Adele's tone changes as she points out that they still need one solid final move to wrap things up. She mentions that Solia seems back to her usual self, but none of them are even graduated yet, and taking on a black mage is way out of their league. She says if anyone can make it happen, it's definitely Han. This time, Han is sure she's right. The dark clouds above start to break up, letting the rain pour down on the tree. The guy in the black robe looks shocked and asks how this is happening. Meanwhile, our boy has managed to start a fire and now it's raining again. The man wonders if this is some kind of magical fluke but brushes it off, thinking that a kid is still just a kid. He tells the branches to attack again, insisting that as soon as the light goes out, this place will be all his. The branches wrapped around the boy's legs. He laughed and said he couldn't believe he fell for it. The man asked if he was scared or just a little crazy. Our hero calmly pulled out his wand and zapped the branch with lightning. The lightning shot through the branches and struck the tree roots beneath the man. A massive bolt blasted from above, shattering the branches and toppling the tree. The man stood frozen in shock, unable to grasp what had just happened. He starts shouting about how this weak magic could be so strong and accuses Han of messing with his head and ruining everything. Han is about to walk away but stops when he hears the guy mumbling about finding the cube. He asks what he's talking about, but it's too late. The guy and the tree are already starting to disappear. He's trying to remember and it feels kind of familiar, maybe from the original stuff. Then Solia strolls over, compliments Han on his awesome strategy and asks if they need to talk. Solia thanked him and pointed out how using the rain could help put out the fire in the tree and give a boost to his lightning magic because of the dampness. He admits she's right, but he points out that if she hadn't thrown up that light defense spell just in time, he'd be done for. Solia says she only did it because he gave clear instructions. He realizes she's pretty good at light magic, especially how fast she jumps into action, while Solia is impressed by his strategy. He asks why the black mage kidnapped them, and Adele explains that his whole plan was to brainwash them and turn them into his minions. That's when he really gets how clever yet scary the Black Mage's idea is by trying to use two top students from Ardell Academy as pawns. Plus, if he managed to brainwash Solia, regular light magic wouldn't have done anything against him. Basil seems really worried and insists he's fine, but he's still acting grumpy. He can't help but ask why everyone's making a big deal out of it when he's the one who hurt his back trying to protect the group. Adele and Juan jump in and scold him a bit. Their concern catches him off guard and makes him realize the whole point of working as a team. He ends up smiling and giving them all some props. A moment later, as they slog through a muddy swamp, Juan gripes about how sticky the mud is. Han shoots back that he volunteered for this and tells him to quit complaining already. Meanwhile, Adele and Solia decide to take a break and chill inside the tree. Even though the poison went away with that giant plant's death, Han knows that wild swamp areas are still pretty rough to get through. He finally finds what he came to this gloomy spot for. As he opens the hidden door, he remembers how in the original story he stumbled upon this treasure glowing with magic while saving Solia. It's all his now, and he gets to decide what to do with it. He can't help but smirk at the mountains of gold, thinking even a loser villain has to earn a living somehow. One of the others asks if the treasure is even real and if it actually belongs to anyone. Han tells him that even if it was owned by someone, he'd be long gone. He points to the statue at the entrance, saying it's an artifact from 300 years back. When Juan asks how he knows that, Han snaps out of his daydream and responds that it's just basic history, as tribes around here used to worship Cerberus and make statues like this. While someone questions if that's really the case, Basil is busy checking out the gold. Suddenly, it makes this excited noise that catches Han off guard. He turns to see Basil totally pumped, hugging a gold bar. Han jokes around and asks if Basil has developed a thing for money, but then he notices the bar looks a lot like a block of cheese. Remembering how much Basil loves cheese, he wonders if the creature is just into anything yellow. With a grin, he tells Basil and Juan to grab as much as they want. As they're checking out the treasure, Han stumbles upon a small chest and wonders if it's the thing he's been searching for. He thinks about how in their tough world, power really matters more than gold or shiny trinkets. Survival is what really counts after all. He opens the chest and realizes it's the treasure that the hero from the original story got after taking down the Black Mage. Inside, there's a worn-out item that Han thinks looks like a black magic spellbook. One freaks out and tells Han to drop it because it could be cursed, asking if he's still into black magic. Han brushes him off, saying it's just a misunderstanding. When he opens the book, it starts floating and glowing brightly. Han realizes it's syncing up with him and turning into a basic magic spellbook. When the book finally lands in his hands, Han tells Juan to check the title again. Juan still looks kinda skeptical, but sees it's just a regular magic spellbook. Han realizes that the book totally adapts to what the user needs, making it super handy for staying low-key. Whether the Black Mage actually put it there or not doesn't really matter, since it's just really useful. If it's got all the basics covered, it's basically worth a ton of money. The book allows you to learn spells on the spot, like a cheat code for mastering what students at Ardell Academy spend an entire year working on. So, they're getting ready to bounce, since the people at the top are probably getting bored by now. Han suddenly hears a voice calling him a stranger. He turns around, but there's nobody there. The voice comes again, and he starts to wonder if he's the only one who can hear it. Then he looks at the spellbook in his hands glowing and realizes this isn't just a coincidence. The voice tells him he's stepped into a whole new world, and that whatever he does here is going to shake things up. Han starts to realize what that means. He gets that his little choices could totally flip the original story. He wasn't meant to be in this place at all. In the original plot, he was supposed to be a character that didn't make it. Han starts to think that the book he's got might actually be the prophecy book Carmen mentioned, the one that can see through lies and make its predictions happen for real. He's torn about whether to just step back and stop getting involved, but his desire to do things right pulls him into the academy instead of hanging around on the sidelines. A voice suddenly tells him to step up and help steer the world's miracles, warning that staying idle could bring about destruction. Before he can process it fully, a massive wave of power overwhelms him. He collapses and begins to wonder if this is the true price of hearing these prophecies. Han wakes up in the dorm and sees Juan looking way more relieved than someone who just aced a surprise test. One says Han totally freaked him out. Han groggily says he's sorry and asks for some alone time to chill, claiming he's fine. One heads out to grab some snacks, leaving Han with his thoughts. Han begins to realize that his choices might have triggered a chain reaction that could leave the main characters dead. The Dark Magicians might win the war, causing the Ardell Empire to collapse like a poorly planned group project. With everything on the verge of falling apart, he feels like he's doomed no matter what. Just when he's thinking about kicking back and living a quiet life, fate throws him right into the middle of all the chaos. In his past life, he made many enemies and faced betrayal that left him in a dark place. He does not want to experience that again, so when it feels like the world is falling apart because of him, he cannot ignore the voice urging him to act. He sometimes questions why he takes it so seriously, but deep down he knows he must face it head-on. Plus, he's the only one who knows how the story of Soul Academy ends since he's a reincarnated soul. So, it turns out a dark sorcerer was behind the whole kidnapping deal, but the Academy is keeping it quiet. Even though Han and Juan skipped out to rescue Adele and Solia without permission, they only got a slap on the wrist for ditching campus. Han's wondering if this is just going to lead to more annoying chores, and he's grumbling about not getting paid for all the trouble. His frustration hits a high when he finds out their first magic practical assignment is a group project. Group projects feel like being on a bus where there is a wild passenger, a chaotic driver, a few troublemakers, and even a troll. It's a real-life lesson in dealing with all sorts of people. He thinks group projects are way more annoying than monster hunting, especially since they take up a lot of time in Soul Academy's magic practical class. He wonders if they'll have to go into dungeons to grab stuff and thinks about how cool it would be to score extra points for tackling the harder ones. But then he remembers that if they mess up, they get a big fat 0 for missing the tight deadline. Then Professor Grin throws a curveball by letting the students choose their own groups. He gives them 10 minutes to sort it out and the classroom erupts into chaos. Han is really frustrated by this and just wishes some level-headed person would step in and take charge for him. Out of nowhere, someone chimes in. Han opens his eyes and spots Lee right in front of him, asking if he wants to join the same group. The other students are totally caught off guard by this surprise offer. Han raises an eyebrow and asks Lee if he's really asking him to team up for this project. Lee eagerly waits for an answer, but Han shakes his head and says, "No way, because it feels like too much work." Lee looks like he's just been hit with a spell. He's totally stunned, trying to wrap his head around what he just heard. Later in the dorm room, Juan and Adele ask how Han could so easily turn down the genius Lee. Han just shrugs and says his teammates feel comfortable because they've played together before, making it the obvious choice. Now everyone's left wondering if he's just playing hard to get, or if he really prefers a chill life. He knows deep down that he's actually scared. He has no idea what could happen if he gets too close to the main character. Trying to change the topic and stop overthinking, he starts talking about their uniforms, pointing at his red necktie like it's the most interesting thing ever. One jumps in, sounding like he's reciting from a school brochure. Since they all wear the same color, it really feels like they're part of a team. Watching them crack up and get hyped about uniform colors proves that no matter how smart they are, kids will always be kids. Then our boy pulls out a poster and suggests they skip the small talk and pick a dungeon to dive into. He throws out a B-rank dungeon called the Forest of Ghosts, but Adele jumps in with a suggestion to shoot for something tougher, like the A-ranked Witch's Cabin. Han gets what she's saying but argues that their success in the dungeon mostly comes down to the items they grab. He's heard there's a secret S-rank item hidden in the Forest of Ghosts dungeon, which leaves everyone stunned. Solia chimes in, saying that the item could really help them stand out from the other groups. Adele brings up that the extra rewards might win Professor Grin over, and Juan asks how Han always gets info that even he misses. Han just shrugs and says it's all about reading, then suggests they dive in. Everyone's on board and super pumped about it. As Han watches everyone settle into their roles, he figures being a jack-of-all-trades really fits him. But he can't shake the memory of how Lee Han discovered the hidden rewards in the Forest of Ghosts during his 3rd year at Soul Academy. If he wants to truly be part of the group and not just an outsider, he knows he has to step up his game. So, he tells them to get ready and meet up in 2 days. Later that night, someone fills a guy in about the dungeon Han plans to check out. This dude, Seymour Parker, is all about it and says it's a solid pick. He suggests they get ready for it. A couple of days later, the crew gathers at the library to head into the Forest of Ghosts. Han brings up this rumor that ghosts slip into the library in the morning since the barrier is weak. Adele insists that ghosts aren't real, but then a voice comes out of nowhere and proves her wrong, making her scream when a guy shows up. He quickly mentions he's a student and says ghosts are just monsters, so it makes sense. Han spots his weird tie and figures he's not a magic major, then asks what he's doing there. The guy introduces himself as Usher Barton, a first-year student joining their team. Han remembers hearing about a talented freshman in divination magic. Usher promises he will not be a burden and asks to join. Suspecting a motive, Han presses him and asks if he has seen something. Usher hesitates and Han guesses he has a specific reason for being there. Before Usher can explain, a woman steps in and tells them not to jump to conclusions. She says Usher could be useful if they are heading into the chaotic bookshelf area of the Forest of Ghosts. Adele screams in fear again, and the girl quickly apologizes and introduces herself as Yoon Hai, who is a 2nd-year theology student and Usher's guardian. She reveals that Usher can see ghosts and explains that Usher recently saw something strange during divination practice, which made him determined to join their group. Yoon mentioned it's the first time she's seen Usher so focused. To make sure he doesn't wander off, she got the okay from a professor to be his guardian. Han is totally fine with it and jokingly asks if Yoon's got any secret plans like being a spy. She laughs it off and says she only agreed to tag along because of Han. When Han asks Yoon why she's into him, she says he's totally her type. This catches him off guard. She goes on to explain that ever since he joined the magic department and their eyes locked, she felt a spark. With his bright eyes, slightly messy brown hair, and that cute one-sided smile when he laughs, he's exactly her type of handsome. Yoon admits she loves checking out cute guys. When Han looks shocked, Won jokes that his soul is getting snatched away and adds that Yoon is famous for attracting good-looking, high-achieving guys. He mentions that teaming up with theology students makes sense since they're dealing with those dark attribute monsters, brushing off Han's worries. Solia agrees, and Han can't believe how chill everyone is. Yoon suggests they get started right away. Usher grabs a book to break through the barrier, and a bright flash of light temporarily blinds them. Suddenly, a portal opens up and Han instantly realizes it's the entrance to the dungeon. Basil growls in surprise since it only knows about slime dungeons. Han picks it up to calm it down and steps forward. A moment later, the battle kicks off. Han tells Adele to go for it, and she swings her sword at the enemy while Won backs her up from the side. Han starts to see that Professor Grin was spot on about how teamwork is key. In this dungeon, you need a special item to see the ghost monsters, and if players don't coordinate properly, they might end up fighting each other before they even face the real threats. The group got organized and figured out their roles. Adele and Won took charge of scouting since they're super fast. Solia jumped in to deal with the dark monsters using her strength, while Basil pumped out serious damage with his fire attacks. They zipped through the smaller monsters and Han felt pretty awesome as he aimed at a ghost, watching their plan come together perfectly. Yoon thinks the group is really impressive even without any extra help. Usher agrees but says Han is even more incredible. Han can track ghosts without studying theology or using any fancy gear. Usher feels like it's kind of like trying to fight with a blindfold on but still hitting every move. He remembers a prophecy about Han being the outsider from the magic department destined to save the world, and watching Han and Basil makes him believe it's all true. Usher suddenly snaps out of his daydream and yells that he feels some crazy energy coming from the right. Smoke is billowing out of a nearby house, and Han can't shake this cold, heavy feeling that makes regular monsters seem like cute little kittens. Panic hits Han as he starts to wonder if they're already up against the boss. He remembers that the boss in the Forest of Ghosts has this creepy way of using psychic attacks to read and mess with people's memories. But they brace themselves for the fight anyway. Adele yells that the boss is on the move and asks if everyone's ready. Han suddenly realizes they might have already dealt with a similar attack without even noticing. The boss swings its scythe and hits Han right on. In that moment, he feels how tough it really is to face a boss monster. It's way faster than he thought it would be. Since this attack isn't physical, all they have to do is ignore the voices and keep their minds together to stay safe. Han finds himself drifting in complete darkness, and he can't feel anything around him. He starts to think this might be the void room his pet is messing with, but it seems way too intense for a B-rank dungeon. A loud shout cuts through the silence claiming he's taken it out. Then someone he knows starts apologizing, and another person angrily snaps that he should have just left if he couldn't deal with it. That's when it hits him he's stuck in one of his own memories. The memories make him think he's still just as terrible as ever. He remembers a female doctor asking if he was the jerk who backstabbed his senior. Another doctor calls him a psycho and warns people not to mess with him. They don't even know he's listening, but he doesn't really care. He did what he had to do. The senior he talked about was a total nutcase whose abuse harmed people. He reported it, fully aware that there would be consequences. These days, folks steer clear of him and label him the whistleblower. Whether he's a genius or not, all he gets are insults for tanking a senior's career over what they think was no big deal. During a rough shift, a coworker sees his hands shaking and asks if he's okay, reminding him that it's time to go into surgery. He just stares at his trembling hands, not knowing how to stop them, and quietly says that he has no idea what's going on. When the hospital director finds out, he's really furious and wants to know why someone with shaky hands is even allowed to do surgeries. Without skipping a beat, he orders them to get that person out of the operating room immediately. When he talks to his psychiatrist, the doctor pretty much says that his handshakes are due to some pent-up feelings that got stirred up in the operating room. He gets that it makes sense, but he's not really excited about it. The shrink mentions that he'll need to stick with therapy to see any changes, which makes him internally roll his eyes. Just another issue that's going to take ages to sort out. He starts wondering how his life ended up like this and what kept him going through his internship. Feeling a bit lost, his thoughts are interrupted by a hospital staff member who bluntly asks why he even picked clinical practice. They call him a failure with shaky hands and remind him how he went from being a top student to feeling totally useless. With each mean look and harsh comment, he feels his mental strength crumbling more and more. Eventually, it all becomes too much, and he walks out of the hospital on his own. He thought he was different now, but when he ends up at Soul Academy, he realizes he's still that weak, broken version of himself. Out of nowhere, a light pops up above Han, and to his surprise, there's Basil floating in it. He's baffled about how Basil managed to break into his mental space, especially since it was set up by the boss monster's psychic attack. As Basil comes closer, it catches Han's gaze and reminds him about their contract. That's when it hits him. Taming links a mage's feelings to a monster. Basil must have sensed his emotions and flown over to find him. Han chuckles and teases that Basil is more like an emotional puppy than a dragon, and Basil just swoops in for a hug. Han realizes that his choice back then wasn't just about being a pain to his cocky senior. It was more about doing the right thing, saving lives, and taking down corruption. He gives a nod to Basil for helping him get his head straight and says it's time to move on from this empty space. Out of nowhere, Basil starts pointing like crazy. Han looks over and spots a heart floating in the dark. He wonders if it's some hidden treasure and thinks that being inside the monster shows him stuff he couldn't see from the outside. Han sees the ghost lantern, which is basically the boss's heart, and where all its power comes from. He tunes in to gather his energy and shouts for Basil to help out. Basil lets out a huge burst of fire that powers up the 3 giant magic arrows Han shoots at the heart. They slam into it and pierce through while burning it. The boss screams as the ghost lantern breaks free and floats in front of Han. Adele runs over, all excited that Han finally made it out. She mentions that Solia got away earlier, but everyone started getting worried since Han took so long. One asks if he really beat the boss. Han shows them the system message that says he cleared the B-rank dungeon called Ghost Forest. One can't believe it, and says they thought Han was just messing around since hidden items are super hard to find. Han nods, saying that their guess totally makes sense. Solia spots the lantern and wonders if that's the secret item. She can't take her eyes off it and thinks it's amazing. Her smile disappears as she mentions that something feels off. She points out that they totally underestimated the boss's mental attack and still got sucked into the void. One asks if a spell that powerful should even be in a B-rank dungeon. Adele agrees and adds that the lantern's power seems way too strong for this place. Han squints as it dawns on him. He quickly asks where Yoon and Usher are, and the question catches everyone off guard. Before anyone can say anything, shadowy figures in black robes swoop in and grab Yoon and Usher. Parker steps up with a smirk, teasing the theology students for trying to protect Han's crew while accusing them of not being totally honest about their intentions. He's insisting they give up Yoon and Usher and side with him, or else there will be trouble. As Han watches, it hits him that Parker has totally lost it. Parker tells Han that if his crew joins in now, it'll really help wrap up the project since they're almost finished and just need a few last touches. Han starts to feel a bit unsure and asks what Parker's really up to. Parker explains that they're short on people because they've been focused on the guys who can do magic and brings up Han's idea about summoning demons. Adele can't shake off this uneasy feeling. She's starting to question if the academy is really mixed up in dark magic and if the necromancy department is behind it. She remembers that Han teamed up with Parker's crew back in his first year, and now she's worried he might still have ties to those necromancers. That thought really freaks her out, especially when she considers that the dark mage Han kicked out of the baobab tree might have been part of some bigger scheme to trick them all. Han thinks the ritual is a bit tricky but doable and offers to help out. Parker smirked, knowing Han would come through, and felt a sense of relief. Han starts naming what they need, and Parker chimes in that they've got everything except the medium, which is why he's here. Adele can't believe how laid back everyone is about it. She's curious about what the whole medium thing is, and Parker just brushes it off, calling it some lame magic. Then he drops the bomb that it's actually for summoning demons and that they need a strong human host. Strengthening the boss wasn't just for kicks. They're on the lookout for a powerful mage, preferably with some holy blood. Parker says Han always makes things way easier. Han extends his hand for a shake with Parker and casually mentions that it might be a good time for them to team up again. As soon as Parker grabbed his hand, Han zapped him with a jolt of electricity, sending Parker tumbling to the ground, shocked. Parker yelled in pain, asking what the heck Han was doing. Han just laughed and said it was pretty dumb to think they could work together after everything that went down. He reminded Parker how close he was to getting caught in his plan, and pointed out the 2 big screw-ups he made, trusting Han too much and totally underestimating him. Han pulled out a wand and zapped Parker with a painful jolt of electricity. Parker struggled to get up, dark energy crackling around him, and snapped at Han, questioning if he really had the guts to betray him. Parker's anger boiled over as he accused Han of thinking he could just bail because he got moved to the magic department. He unleashed a powerful spell, yelling that Han would be the next sacrifice. Han barely managed to dodge it, shocked at how fast Parker was. Once he got back on his feet, Adele hurried over to check on him. She was super worried he might be getting back into dark magic. She mentioned that if it was true, she would have taken him out herself. Han didn't know whether to feel flattered or freaked out by that. He joked that at least it's nice to know she cares. Parker was still standing after getting hit by the lightning, and Adele realized just how strong he really was. Han notices it too. That kind of blast would take down anyone else. But Parker isn't just anyone. He's the main bad guy for a reason. Han tells Adele to take care of the necromancers that are after Solia and him. He knows Parker's locked onto him now and won't back off until it's finished. Adele nods and gets to work. Before either of them can make a move, Parker fires off a dark energy arrow aimed right at Han. He barely manages to throw up a shield in time, but the next blast is even stronger and wipes out the barrier completely. Han is feeling totally overwhelmed by Parker's power, and this isn't even his full strength. Parker didn't come to mess around. He came to win. A blast sends Han's wand flying, and before he can reach for it, Parker grabs him by the neck and lifts him up like he weighs nothing. Parker tells him to be careful and mentions that he knows too much and is starting to be a hassle. Han realized Parker was tough, but maybe his pet could turn things around. Basil unexpectedly zapped Parker from behind with a burst of flames. Parker freaked out, yelling and dropping Han before turning around to see what had just happened. The flames singed his clothes and totally caught him off guard. Han stood up cheering, looking super impressed by Basil's skills. A notification flashed on the screen saying Basil hit level 10 and unlocked a cool new skill called Maya Spike. It let him unleash fire and lightning within a meter without hurting himself. Han was surprised and told Basil to give the new move a shot. Without thinking twice, Basil shot out lightning spikes all around. One freaked out and yelled that he was crazy, saying everyone would have been toast if Solia hadn't gotten her shield up in time. Han dropped to the ground worn out and mumbled that he didn't realize the spell would drain him so much. Letting Basil go crazy was a mistake since he couldn't handle the pet's power once it got all hyped up. Parker walked right out of the flames and laughed at Han for calling himself a Tamer, saying there was no way he'd fall for such weak tricks. Han couldn't believe Parker was still on his feet. Parker stepped closer, wand in hand, making it clear he wasn't giving up. He swore he'd make Han pay, no matter what it took. Just as Parker was about to deliver the final blow, someone whacked him on the head and knocked him out cold. Han looked up confused and saw a woman in a robe holding a shovel. She let out a sigh of relief and said she was lucky to have her granddad's trusty shovel with her. Pulling back her hood to show her face, she asked if Han was okay. He was mesmerized for a second, but then he just collapsed from exhaustion as the dungeon's toll hit him hard. After all that went down, the Necromancy and Dark Magic Club is on hold for now. Yoon Usher and the crew are getting some much-needed time to chill and heal up. Surprisingly, their project results are off the charts, scoring a perfect 100 out of 100. They're the only team in Professor Green's class to pull that off. Adele and Han didn't expect to grab this much attention. Their classmates were buzzing about a secret thing they discovered and couldn't stop talking about how brave they were. They even joked that Han was stealing the spotlight from Lee Han. Curious about all the chatter, Han started to wonder what the rumors were really about. After all those crazy days, Han finds himself in the underground prison of the academy. As he approaches a cell, the guy inside moves closer and says he heard someone was on their way, so he thought he'd take a look. When Parker sees Han, he demands to know why he's there and accuses him of making fun of him. Han keeps his cool and tells Parker he'll be getting out of prison soon. Parker loses it and says that's just ridiculous. Han asks if Parker's dad would really let him stay locked up and hints that he might even get cut off for causing a scene. Parker feels frustrated and questions why Han is present. Han gives him an envelope and mentions that his dad will bail him out to keep the family's name clean. He emphasizes that the family doesn't put up with anyone who brings shame to their honor. Han gets that Parker is just a scared kid. He might not be worried about dark magic, but the thought of being cut off from his family really freaks him out. When Parker opens the letter, his surprise is obvious. Han breaks it down for Parker, saying the letter's just a backup plan. If Parker gets into hot water again, he can whip it out and say some dark magic group is blackmailing him. It's all made up, but the symbols look pretty legit. Parker admits it does seem real. Han tells him it'll make him look like the victim and give his family a way to cover for him. When Parker asks why Han is helping him out, Han just smirks and drops a hint that it's coming from someone at the academy. Later on, our hero is chilling with Ernest and a lady in a robe. Ernest asks if he got the letter delivered, and Han confidently replies that he did thank him while sipping on some tea. The next day, Ernest calls for our boy and offers him an amazing reward, saying he'll grant any request. Han asks him to help Parker out with his current problem. Ernest is a bit taken aback since Parker leads the Dark Magic Club and is involved in the whole mess. He knows it's not something that can be fixed with just a slap on the wrist. Still, he gets that Han sees something good in Parker. Han goes on to say that Parker really thrives on revenge, and kicking him out might just push him deeper into the darkness. He thinks that if Ernest shows some understanding and helps him out, the Dark Magic Club could break apart, and Parker's skills could actually be put to good use. Han also points out that it's probably safer to keep Parker around, just in case he decides to seek revenge down the line. Ernest grins and tells Han that he might just be cut out to be a teacher. The lady introduces herself as Natalie, the one who saved Han from Parker's deadly plan. Han remembers her from the original story as this bright, lovable student that everyone adored. But just before he passed out, she showed up out of nowhere with a shovel among the necromancy students, which totally caught him off guard. Curious about her, he asks who she really is. Natalie admits she's just there to keep an eye on the dark magic club because the dean sent her. Han figures out she's a spy and starts to think that the necromancy department isn't really paying attention to dark magic studies. Ernest jumps in to say that keeping dark magic research under control helps stop students from screwing around with it. Natalie says she nearly freaked out during the whole demon summoning thing that Parker was in charge of. She admits she really needs Han's help to get her job done, and gives him a sweet thanks that makes him turn red. Han insists he's only helping out to save his own skin. Ernest tells Han that the International Magic Research Society wants him to represent Ardell Academy. Han tries to dodge it, saying the top students should be the ones to go instead. Ernest tells Han that he totally earned it after all the awesome work he's been doing lately. He mentions that Professor Grin even gave Han some extra bonus points on top of his perfect score, which leaves Han scratching his head. Then, Ernest drops the bomb that Han is actually ranked third in the department, just behind Lee and Adele. Han is pretty shocked while Natalie cheers him on. In his room, Han's still reeling, even when Basil goes for a playful bite on his head. He yells and starts pounding the wall, venting about all the annoying extra tasks he has to deal with. One asks if the competition is getting to Han. Han grumbles about not going for third place and how everything's just so annoying. One jokes that he's just unlucky and says Solia wouldn't be impressed with his vibe. Han shoots him a glare, so they agree to shut it for a bit. One then suggests checking out the dungeon reward to lighten the mood. Han pops open the chest and finds an egg inside. The system chimes in, saying it's Tia's egg, an A-rank item that hatches into some legendary creature. Han totally freaks out since it's another reptile. One laughs and jokes that Han's a natural tamer, which makes Han snap at them to just shut up. The Magic Research Conference in the San Empire is a big deal where skilled magicians from all over come together to swap ideas and learn from each other. The school competitions are super intense, with a lot of pride on the line for both the nation and the schools. On the way to the conference, Han starts feeling dizzy in the carriage. Adele notices and asks if he knows anything about herbalism since it's the second topic. Han totally blanks out and asks what herbalism is. She goes on to explain how important it is and brings up Dean Ernest's push for awards, which makes Han feel even worse. Lee jumps in, saying Han just has to figure out the mixing stuff to get through. He tosses Han a book and tells him to hit the books until they get there. Han rolls his eyes but knows this is just classic Lee. Meanwhile, Adele steps away to grab some drinks. Later, Lee hesitantly mentions the map that Han and Adele spotted in his room the other day. Han recalls grabbing it from a dark mage by the baobab tree, and how Lee noticed it when he dropped by. Lee asks if Han still has the map, and Han replies that he does, explaining it's way too risky to leave it in the dorm. He also remembers how pale Lee looked when he first saw it. The map is linked to a cube, which is a pretty dangerous artifact. Even though the Ardell Empire has a ton of white mages, dark mages are still causing trouble, especially at Soul Academy. That's why Han chooses to go to the event instead of just skipping it. Dark mages are all about collecting cubes, these ancient artifacts that boost dark magic. Even someone who's not very strong can turn into a powerful mage with one of these bad boys, which makes them super dangerous. In the original story, dark mages secretly build a tower to gather all the cubes so they can tap into unlimited magic and ultimately try to destroy the world. The heroes pull off a huge win by taking down the tower and getting the cubes, but it's a rough ride with a lot of key characters biting the dust, which really darkens the story. The first cube pops up in the San Empire, and once they get there, Han and the crew jump right into a bunch of classes and activities, including herbalism. The next couple of days are super busy. The night before the competition, Han's just chilling in his room, stretching and thinking about the big event. Ernest is all about pushing them to grab some awards, but since herbalism isn't really his jam, Han decides to just relax and take it easy. Just as Han is about to doze off, he hears a sound outside his window. He calls out to see who it is and hears Lee laughing, impressed that Han caught on. Han replies that it was tough to ignore all that racket. He opens the window and asks why Lee didn't just come through the door. Lee explained he didn't want to be spotted since there was someone in the hallway. Han asks who's there and Lee replies it's Casper, a scout mage rocking an invisibility cloak. Han's taken aback and wonders what a guy like Casper is doing here. Lee is a bit unsure but admits he needs a favor. He wants the map, but before he can get into details, Han jumps in guessing it's about the cube. Lee's surprised and asks how Han figured that out. Han acts clueless, saying the map mentions a cube, assuming Lee already knows how important it is. A while back, Lee's parents locked up the power of the cube, but sadly dark mages took them out while trying to interfere. When Lee came across the map, it probably hit him that those dark mages were back in action. Now, he seems focused on picking up where his parents left off, and is determined to track down and protect the cubes. Lee mentions that tomorrow's the last day of the conference and points out that the map says the cube is buried close by. He asks our boy to hand it over, but gets declined. He trusts Lee, but he's not ready to give up the map. Our hero remembers how much Lee regretted losing the cube in the book, and figures it's better if he handles it himself to avoid any bigger issues down the line. Our boy tells Lee he's not going to give up the map, but is down to tag along. Lee isn't thrilled and argues that the cube is too risky and he doesn't want Han to get wrapped up in it. Han just shrugs and says he never backs down from a challenge. He admits he doesn't really understand the cube or what Lee's trying to do, but he promises he won't get in the way. Han points out to Lee that the map is his, so he's got to be in on the plan too. Lee's a bit taken aback but goes along with it. Han flashes a grin, but then Lee quickly reminds him they've got a competition tomorrow. Han looks a little puzzled when Lee says they'll tackle the important stuff after that. The next day, Han and the other two show up to the room like usual. He quietly watches Lee, who is planning to win the tournament so they cannot break into the magic department and steal the cube. Our boy is stunned when Lee mentions the Department of Magic and a map showing the cube hidden on the third basement floor. Getting in won't be easy with tight security. Han thinks a direct approach is too difficult, but Lee says there's another way. They need to win the tournament, which offers cash and a visit to the magic department. The basement is staff only though, and Han realizes Lee plans to use the visit to sneak in. Han suggests bringing Adele since sneaking in alone won't work. The tournament is team-based, and the tour allows 3 people, so it's easy to involve her without revealing the real plan. Lee agrees but feels it's risky and isn't sure Adele will join. Han's confident because she'd never back down from taking on dark mages. When the tournament day finally arrives, Han starts realizing he dragged Adele into this, but knows nothing about herbology himself. Even so, he decides to wing it and give it his best shot. In the competition room, students are excited to see Professor Miller, the herbology master. He explains magic isn't all bad as it can help people, which is what herbology is about. The professor shifts gears and starts talking about the rules. Every team has to create a potion that has never been seen before. The team that gets a perfect score from all the judges will win. Everyone begins thinking about how to create something truly impressive. For days, Han has been collecting ingredients, expecting something like this but finding it more intense than he thought. Winning the tournament is his best chance at the cube, so he stretches and gets to work. Adele is shocked Han barely understands the book Lee showed him and wonders how they'll impress the tough professors. Our boy just smiles because he has figured it out. Next move. When the professors try Ardell Academy's potion, they are blown away. Bruce Miller feels a rush of creativity. Another professor calls the potion incredible, and one feels like their inner child is back. As the mood lifts, ideas start flowing and their creativity peaks. The Ardell Academy crew makes a drink called the Potion of Art. Han adds herbs from the Senan Empire for a nice scent and creative twist. It is not practical but changes elemental magic into something artistic. Han says the potion turned into a bold and creative show instead of just a battle potion. Her excitement impresses the professors and the team gets into the Department of Magic. Professor says it has been a long time since students showed such creativity. The grand prize is a trip to the Department of Magic to improve their skills. The 3 of them follow the professor to the Civil Affairs office, where the staff helps with things like admissions and mage registration certificates. The spots Bruce is showing are so dull that they find it hard to even fake they are taking interest. Han tells the professor the tour was great but everyone's feeling tired and needs a break. The professor understands since the department building is massive. A teacher then calls him for help, so he asks the group to rest while he steps away. The trio exchange looks and rush toward their goal. Adele asks about the basement door, while Lee assures her it is handled and tells them to move faster before the guards show up. They know this is their only chance to find the cubes and escape. On the 3rd basement level, our hero is surprised they made it without getting caught. Lee gives teleportation scrolls to Adele and Han and explains that most guards are on the 4th level where the main vault is located. She asks about a 3rd scroll, but Lee says they are rare and expensive. He feels it is fair to give the scrolls to them because Han is in trouble, and Adele came along to fight the dark mages. When Lee sees something shining ahead, he moves to check it out. Adele follows him while Han wonders how Lee got the scrolls. As they approach a glowing vault, Lee steps on a wire that sets off an alarm. Red lights flash and sirens blare all around them. Adele tells them to retreat, but Han insists that the cube is inside. She asks how he knows, and our boy points to a screen that shows the start of the 2nd main episode of the 1st cube. He needs to retrieve the sealed cube within 24 hours, or everything will be over for him. Somehow, our boy grabs the cube, but red lights flash and alarms blare, warning of intruders. A voice announces an explosion spell will secure the vault. Han quickly tells everyone to run as the blast goes off. After escaping, Han is relieved but startled by approaching footsteps. It's Professor Divert, the math teacher from Ardon Academy. Confused, Han wonders why the professor is there. Our boy tells him they are lost, but the professor laughs, dismissing excuses. He sarcastically tells them to be grateful for finding the cube. Han asks in shock if the professor is a dark mage. The professor mocks the vault's weak security and reveals their plan to reclaim the cube. He notes how they've been struggling without their map, but are thrilled the students found the cube for them. With a grin, he asks if they'll step aside or face the consequences. A battle kicks off pretty quickly. The professor dominates Han's group with his dark magic and questions why they keep pushing when it's obvious they've hit their limit. Adele tries to defend herself with a mana shield but collapses shortly after. Lee rushes to her side while Han thinks about how the professor is spot on, and they barely hold their ground because their skills aren't good enough. Even though Han got pushed into the battle, he's glad he managed to grab the cube earlier. But getting past the professor with the cube feels like a lost cause. Thinking fast, he calls out to Lee and tosses the cube wrapped in the teleportation scroll they gave him. He tells them to take it and go. Adele hesitates as she worries about him, but Han snaps at her to leave. Reluctantly, she agrees, but not before warning him to come back safe or she'll kick his butt. The professor calls Han out, saying it's typical for someone as unpredictable as him to swipe the cube right before him. He won't let him go after all the chaos he's caused. As he moves his hand, it glows a dark purple, and suddenly a bunch of magical chains wrap around Han. Even though he has lost the cube, the professor casually mentions that he knows Han has the map with the locations of the other cubes. The professor pressures him to hand it over. Han cheekily says he doesn't have it, asking if the professor is sure he's not looking in the wrong place. The professor is annoyed and questions if Han has lost his mind, wondering why he's so fearless. Han just grins and says he completely trusts his partner. Basil appears behind the professor and prepares to unleash a breath attack. A huge wave of flames shoots toward the professor, making him let go of Han. Furious after getting hit by the flames, the professor turns his anger toward the dragon. Han finally sees the opportunity that Basil has opened up for him. It's his shot at taking out the professor, but he can't shake off the feeling that leaving this guy alive isn't an option. After breaking out of the vault with Basil, some dark mages start chasing him into the woods, firing spells his way. Han throws up a shield to protect himself. These mages are determined to stop him. He knows that if he keeps playing defense like this, he will hit a wall soon. And that wall hits him faster than he thought. Han's magic is running on empty, and he collapses to his knees. The damage from the professor's earlier attack is way worse than he expected. At this rate, he's about to be in big trouble. The dark mages conjure magical bows and arrows, and Han feels the tension. One of the arrows shoots straight at him, but Basil leaps in front to take the hit. Han's vision goes red, his thoughts racing. Even though Basil stands strong, the mages panic as the dragon launches a surprise attack. Flames quickly spread through that part of the forest. Han runs with Basil, knowing the little dragon is in danger because of him. Suddenly, a voice shouts to protect Agonist, and he spots Adele hiding behind a bush. Thinking they've lost the mages, Adele tries to calm Han and assures him they're safe now. She sighs, warning him not to pull a stunt like that again. Feeling guilty, Han explains he had no better plan. His mind races with worry for Basil, who took an arrow meant for him. Han regrets not tending to Basil's injury right away, but was too focused on escaping. He knows even a dragon can die if its heart is pierced. Overwhelmed with hopelessness, fragments of memories echo in his mind. He reflects on his fate, feeling it's already set in stone. If he moves forward, the worst outcome is ruining his reputation. But with guardians in trouble, things always get complicated. If all hope is lost, he knows he has to prioritize his own survival. Considering how much Basil means to him, Han is ready to do whatever it takes. He asks Adele if she has any of that elixir hanging around, wanting to borrow some. She wonders what he's planning since even the professor couldn't help someone so badly hurt. Han takes the elixir and confidently says he can make it work. The art elixir boosts creativity like crazy, as drinking it lets you whip up something from nothing for a bit. Han downs the elixir, hoping to catch that slim chance he needs. No matter what, he's determined to save Basil. He uses magic to gather a lab coat and a scalpel, declaring that the operation is about to kick off. Han kneels on the ground, using magic to help him perform the surgery. Adele knows red dragons are rare, but there are many other monsters to tame. Our boy looks like he's barely keeping it together, yet he's pushing his magic to save a creature that probably won't make it. Adele wants to stop him because she is scared that if things go sideways, she might lose him too. But when she locks eyes with Han, who is focused and determined, she can't intervene. He manages to pull out the arrowhead, and now he just has to stitch up the wound, which is the last part of the surgery. Han sighs with relief as memories from his past life surface. Despite his experience, being near an operating room always made his hands tremble, and he'd run away if he couldn't grip a scalpel properly. Now, his once shaky hands are steady with confidence. Han announces the operation is done, and Lee is amazed, watching him save a dying dragon without any magic. Adele notes that Basil's breathing has stabilized and the bleeding has stopped, even without healing magic. Han realizes operating on a monster is unusual in this world. He understands their shock since Basil was in critical condition moments ago. He sighs, glad the surgery succeeded, and relieved he won't face criticism for the lack of hygiene as he might have in Korea. Han reminds himself that he's not in Korea anymore, and Basil isn't a dog, but a dragon. He's not the same Hanhei used to be. All these things have come together to create something incredible. A notification pops up informing that the healing light has been successfully applied and kicking off the effects. A faint glow appears over his pet, which comforts him. He begs for his dragon to survive and then collapses, leaving everyone worried. After blacking out, Han wakes up staring at a ceiling he recognizes. He's been out cold for a few days and is now in the infirmary at Ardell Academy. Adele tells him that the school has dealt with the situation. But it's hard to stop the rumors flying around. People are saying that the top students got attacked, and it might be tied to the recent chaos caused by dark mages. Han whispers that the rumors hit pretty close to home. Han believes the adults are handling the fallout on their own, and decides not to worry about it anymore, since he is not a kid now. Lee arrives with the cube and explains that dark mages, the Department of Magic, and other academies are searching for it. Adele mentions they worked hard to obtain it and have no intention of giving it up. Lee agrees but informs him there will be a hearing at the Department of Magic. Han feels surprised and sighs as he holds the cube, determined not to give it to anyone. A week later, Louis Maxwell from the Department of Magic demands strict punishment for the students accused of breaking into their base. Another professor defends them by saying it must be a misunderstanding. Louis questions Bruce, asking if smashing vaults to pieces can really be called a misunderstanding. Bruce insists it was just a careless mistake and suggests giving the students a warning. Louis disagrees, saying they need to address this now before it escalates. He asks the students what they took. Han stays calm, knowing the department has no idea what was inside since only the vault's owner knows. Han's plan is simply to deny everything and claim the vault broke by accident. The professor gets angry at their ridiculous excuse. Han repeats that they got lost, used a detection spell to find the exit, and accidentally broke into the vault. The professor, frustrated, tells the judge the vault is empty, property is damaged, and items are missing from the third basement floor. He argues the students are the only outsiders, so they must be responsible. The judge says they need to wait for the vault's owner, who has been called as a witness. Suddenly the doors swing open and everyone is shocked to see Headmaster Ernest. He remarks that his students seem to have caused some trouble. A confused young professor insists this matter is under the Department of Magic's control. The headmaster responds that he needs to be involved since he owns the vault. Han recalls that Headmaster Ernest started collecting and sealing the cubes at the Soul Academy. He has no clue that the headmaster has stashed the cube away in the vault of the Department of Magic. The headmaster mentioned that the kids only went down to the vault because he told them to, but they often get lost when they accidentally find it. They hurry to get the cubes back since they're just kids and mistakes like that always happen. Ernest hands the list of missing stuff to the judge to prove it's his, and Louis is shocked when it all turns out to be true. Since everything is cleared up, the judge says the students will receive a 7th level penalty from the Magic Department, a letter of apology, and 30 hours of community service. The judge asks Louis if he has any objections, and if not, the final decision is made. Han talks to the headmaster, who says he won't ask any questions and hands him a letter. Our hero is curious if the headmaster knows about the cubes and why he's letting them off the hook without digging deeper. But he's also eager to learn how much the headmaster knows. As Han opens the paper to read it, Ernest mentions that Professor Divert has suddenly vanished from campus after attending a conference and hasn't returned. The headmaster asks if he knows anything about it, because the academy failed by not recognizing Divert's true nature sooner. He asks if Han has been dealing with the professor and how he managed to survive. Han says he survived because of his role as a tamer, and credits everything to his partner, Basil. Ernest says it was really Han's talent that made it possible and insists it is not just flattery, but genuine belief. Once he deciphers the note, he will determine if he has been too optimistic about Han. Han spots the paper and starts thinking it might be some kind of code. Ernest explains that he found the note on Divert's bookshelf. As always, the professor writes in confusing arithmetic codes that Han struggles to understand. The headmaster believes Han might be the one to figure it out. Han thinks the dark mage professor's code might lead to another cube and asks for time to investigate. The headmaster feels proud of Han's determination and grows more confident in his abilities. Yoon asks Lee about his project with Han after everything that happened. Lee admits he does not trust Han, saying he seems a bit off. She teases him about how often people ask about Han, joking if he has already spilled all his secrets. When Lee wonders who leaked that info, she points to the crystal ball, saying Biolnim is the source. Lee brushes it off, deciding it is fine to share some details since he got clear advice about the cube. He recalls finding Han suspicious during their first year, and would not be shocked if he turned into a dark mage. But after spending more time with him, Lee feels he cannot be all that bad unless betrayal is involved. Yoon agrees and asks if he wants to check if the prophecy about Han is still on track. She jokes about bread, saying she is happy to help such a good-looking guy, and informs Lee to watch upcoming events. She promises to bring fresh bread daily, hinting that Byolnim says something unusual is coming. On the other side, Adele complains about the exhausting 30 hours of community service. Han asks her if that's truly what they have to do. She snaps that he should be helping with the cleaning instead of focusing so much on an egg all day. Han defends himself, saying that taking proper care of it will ensure it grows strong and healthy. Suddenly, Juan bursts into the room to share the latest buzz about the monster in the specimen room is back. He even assures them that this time it's totally true. Han recalls stories about the monster, which started with someone panicking over monsters in the specimen room, like an old-school ghost story. Younger students spread rumors, claiming it's not a small creature, and even saying a student died. With no proof, it was dismissed as a rumor, leaving Lilil embarrassed after confronting the professor. Han then gets a notification about Episode 3 on Drake, confirming his suspicions. Drake's main skill is stealth, making it invisible even to teachers. Some students can see it, while others remain unaware, perfectly explaining how Drake stays hidden. One mentions that Lilil's visit to the professor made a huge fuss, and students started doing some pretty wild stuff. He says people are saying the monster is a drake, which sounds ridiculous to him. Han is intrigued by that sharp guess. But if they could catch the monster, its skin and blood would sell for a fortune. That's why students are getting together to hunt it. Han rolls his eyes at all this, calling it just a silly rumor. He wonders who in their right mind would buy into this and join in on such a foolish act. When Han steps into the classroom, he feels annoyed because there seem to be more foolish people at the school than he thought. One guy is trying to excite everyone about hunting a drake by saying they could earn extra credits and possibly advance directly to the 3rd year. Our boy thinks these students are being ridiculous because Drake is not an easy opponent. Then a boy named Derek walks up to Solia and asks if she wants to join their hunting group. Han immediately understands Derek's intentions and is sure Solia will not agree because she does not need money or grades. To Han's surprise, Solia considers the idea and decides to join, leaving him feeling uneasy. Another student tells Derek to stop joking, pointing out Solia's confusion. He questions why someone like her wants to join a hunting group, but she insists she's serious and asks to join. Han wonders if Solia has lost her mind. He recalls the Drake hunting group from the original story, where Derek led clueless students on a wild adventure. Solia wasn't part of it then, leaving Han to wonder how things will unfold, especially since none of those groups ever returned. As the light of the sunset fills the room, Solia writes while reflecting on her dad's lessons that magic requires a good heart and a strong will. He built up their family's name with magic, and his words always stuck with her. Now that their family's reputation is shot, Solia wonders if she can live up to his hopes. Bringing back the Aranet name relies on her becoming a mage. For the first time, she has lost her top rank to Han. Her hard work no longer feels enough as she starts to doubt her ability to beat him in the final assessments. Her only chance might be joining the Drake subjugation team to earn extra points. Drakes are vulnerable to light and fire, and they're probably hanging out in the dark specimen room. The rest of the team isn't very skilled, so this is her chance to take back her spot as the Mage of Light. Solia is all in to make it happen. Yoon tells Han that there's no way Solia can take down Drake by herself. When Han presses her for more details, she reminds him that her predictions come with a price. He hands her a bag of bread, and she can't help but ask why he's so into Solia. She assumes he might have a crush on her, but Han quickly denies it. He explains that while Solia was once his favorite character in the book, now he only wants to ensure she does not get eliminated too early. Since he knows she can't handle Drake, he starts thinking about what his next move should be. The scene shifts to the battle. Solia casts a light magic barrier just in time, but Drake's wings break through it and create a large hole. She figures that without the barrier, the damage would have been way worse. The team is in a tough spot, and one person suggests they should pull back since 2 members are already out of commission. Plus, the dark specimen room is giving Drake the upper hand. Although the others argue for retreat, Derek stays firm and insists they have set traps and only need the beast to walk into one. Another teammate speaks up and points out that the creature appears to be avoiding the traps as if it knows their locations. Derek shakes his head, insisting it doesn't add up because Drake shouldn't be that smart. The group starts to argue, and their focus is totally broken. Drake sees his chance and charges right at them, launching an attack. Derek gets knocked down, confused, and tries to process what's going on. He has a hunch that someone's pulling Drake's strings, and he's spot on. Hidden in the shadows is Hughes Stainer, a 5th-year Tamer. Taking advantage of the professor's not paying attention, Hughes has set up shop in the specimen room for his scheme. Hughes thinks the mages of Ardell Academy are total idiots and holds them responsible for wiping out the Dark Mage group during that big magical war 15 years ago, which ended up costing him his dad. Now he's got revenge on his mind and can't wait to make the Academy quake in fear. Solia is the last one left standing and knows she can't do it all on her own. But she's not about to throw in the towel. She channels all the magic she has left into a light spell, raising her wand and hoping for help. A voice calls out from behind Solia, asking if she's lost her mind. It's Han, who quickly picks her up and tells her to save her magic. With everyone else down, she's the only one with light magic that can actually fight. He tells her to stay on guard. Ignoring him completely, Solia asks when he showed up. Han watches Drake's moves and sees they're too sharp to be natural. He thinks another tamer might be pulling the strings and decides to test his skills. Han suddenly tosses something at the beast and tells it to eat. The creature snaps it up immediately, leaving Hughes confused and scratching his head about why he lost control. Han smirks, knowing a thing or two about taming. Drakes have this instinct to bite anything moving while they're eating. Drake looks a bit woozy from the orb and Han chuckles while wondering about its taste. As the monster wobbles, Han takes advantage of the moment and shouts to Solia to aim for Drake's heart. Solia grips her wand tightly, channeling her magic into it. A bright light flickers at the tip as she smacks the confused Drake right on. Hughes watches fuming as he loses his grip on the creature. With no one controlling it, the monster goes wild and puts Hughes at risk. In desperation, he decides to use dark magic to force it into submission, even though it takes a heavy toll on him. Dark energy surrounds Drake, and suddenly its eyes are glowing red. Solia picks up on the weird vibes, and Han realizes dark magic is at play. He quickly figures out that the Tamer must be a dark mage. Han's feeling frustrated because everything seemed fine until now, but this sudden twist totally throws him off. Out of nowhere, Han gets a notification saying he's unlocked a new ability. The message asks if he wants to activate the Tamer's touch. Han suddenly unlocks this awesome new skill that totally blows his mind as his affinity shoots up. Another message pops up saying Drake already has an owner but could still be tamed. The idea of taking someone else's pet freaks him out a bit, but then a prompt asks if he wants to give it a shot. Han grins because why not and goes for it. Energy surges through him, turning his eye gold like Drake's and forming a connection between them. Solia is totally shocked, trying to figure out why Drake is acting so chill all of a sudden. She asks Han if he's the one who got the beast to behave. He grins and says that taming reptiles seems to be his new thing. Hughes can't believe his eyes when he sees his pet being tamed by someone else. After all the hard work he put into it, he's livid and shoots out some dark magic from his hand. Drake suddenly lifts its head and Han freaks out, wondering if he's lost control. The beast heads toward Hughes, who starts celebrating like he's the king of the world. Han can't help but wonder how he even managed to tame it in the first place. But out of nowhere, the beast bites Hughes and starts drooling all over him. Han quickly tells the beast to spit Hughes out. After it does, it completely wears out the poor guy who has been overdoing it with the dark magic. In the end, everything calms down. The director arrives after checking out the report and is totally taken aback to find out there's another dark mage causing trouble at the academy. He gives a shout out to Han for stepping up to deal with the people behind the Drake mess and for saving the students' lives. As a nice bonus, Han ends up with a fat sack of cash like you'd expect from a rich family. Back in his room, he starts to think about this new skill he just picked up. It's something he's never seen before in the story. The Tamer's touch lets him temporarily tame a monster during a fight by quickly boosting affinity. But the catch is, he can only tame one monster at a time. Han thinks it's kind of weird that he got this skill instead of Basil, who he thinks would have been a better fit for it. He thinks it would have been cool to test out the skill more on Drake, but it was just a one-time thing. Plus, his dragon really doesn't like the new beast. In the end, he decides to give Drake to the professors. With Basil by his side, he comforts his little dragon and tells him he's not turning his back on him. After the battle, Han scores a reward for finishing the third main episode. He's super pumped and can't wait to open this glowing chest, hoping for at least a B-rank prize. To his surprise, he ends up with an A-rank spatial bag. He snatches it up and is totally stoked because getting one of these bags would normally cost way more than just a few gold coins. Then a new notification pops up telling him he's getting an extra reward for keeping casualties low. The message says he should check inside the bag to claim it. He's taken aback but starts to get what they mean. In the original novel, nobody made it out alive. But that's not the case this time, since even the seriously injured students pulled through. Han tips the bag upside down, dumping the extra reward onto the table. He spots a folded red card and picks it up. Once he takes a closer look, he sees that it's filled with math formulas. He quickly realizes it's the stuff the math professor always includes in the exam. Looking at the paper more closely, he suddenly gets a sense of déjà vu with the formula on it. Out of the blue it clicks and he gasps, waking Basil from his nap. He sets the red paper next to another note from Director Ernest and notices they're pretty similar. He had managed to decode most of the notes, but he was stuck on the last part. For a while now, Han has been trying to figure out if the symbols need decoding, or if he just needs to solve some equations thanks to the professor's confusing math lessons. After looking over the new paper, Han finally gets that he has to crunch the numbers that the symbols stand for. After a bunch of sleepless nights, he finally cracks the code. The numbers seem to point to a spot. Room 205, a classroom for necromancers. He waits until the place is clear, then pushes the door open and steps into the dim room. As he moves cautiously around, he spots cabinet number 14, and it's actually open. Checking the academy's student list, he finds out that the student who used this cabinet vanished ages ago without a trace. Opening cabinet 14. Han finds what he suspected all along, a glowing object that turns out to be another cube. It dawns on him that the professor had gotten this cube from some dark mages and stashed it away. He quickly puts it in his bag, feeling a mix of relief and stress about keeping it safe all by himself. To lay low and avoid any attention, he decides to keep quiet for a few days. But his plans get thrown off when Yoon won't stop hunting for him. Our hero is getting pretty annoyed with her always tagging along. She pouts because he keeps turning down her requests for a date. Han straight up tells her he's just not interested. She playfully asks if it's because he's into Solia instead, which totally catches him off guard, and he wants to know where that even came from. Then, she switches gears, putting her hands together and asking him in the cutest way to join her. That's when Han realizes she's trying to drag him into this astrology contest hosted by the theology department. She's telling him about this contest that's all about basic astrology, and that the prize is 3 theology credits, which could really help boost his grades. Han is kind of tempted because getting credits from another department means he can skip one class next semester, and that would help him avoid dealing with Professor Grint's awful class. Yoon is trying to convince him by saying she's the best in the theology department and promises to make it super easy for him. He hesitates for a moment, but in the end he goes for it, swayed by how good the benefits sound. He's hanging out with Yoon, diving into some theology stuff. When the day of the astrology contest rolls around, he's feeling all tense and off. Out of nowhere, Yoon tells him to check something out quickly. When he looks at the jury, he's totally floored to see someone who looks just like him, but with different hair color. Han discovers that the stern judge is really his older brother, Han Si-hyuk. If he had known this, he would have avoided the competition. Si-hyuk always wears sharp black clothes and is well respected in the magic community. He started studying astrology at age 12 and is now the top prophet of the Ardell Empire, having followed a successful path since the beginning. Han Si-hyuk is the legitimate son of Count Hesso. Si-hyuk, on the other hand, is an illegitimate son who faced discrimination growing up. Because of this, Si-hyuk feels inferior and holds resentment toward his younger brother. This situation is understandable since Han often tried to humiliate Si-hyuk. At the beginning of the light novel, Han Si-hyuk often makes hurtful comments as the antagonist. Even now, as he looks at Si-hyuk, Han wonders if Si-hyuk sees his younger brother the way he should. But he doesn't. Si-hyuk is becoming a respected prophet, breaking free from his family's shadows and his status as an illegitimate child. Right now, he doesn't feel happy to see his older brother. He sighs, hoping his brother won't be petty and give him a low score. He wouldn't mind if it only affected him, but Yoon is on his team, and it wouldn't be fair to penalize her. However, Yoon is excited and encourages Han to do his best. Han knows that is all he can do. All the groups sit at their tables and fill out the questionnaire. After that, they showcase their demonstrations using the crystal ball and levitation spells. This keeps the time moving quickly. At some point, Si-hyuk asks an organizer why the magic seems so advanced, and whether the answers to the questionnaire have been shared. She explains that the questions come from an outside contractor at the Department of Magic, making a leak very unlikely. She understands his concerns about the high score, but reminds him that Yoon is the best second-year theology student. This means her magic partner could also gain from this. She asks Si-hyuk to set aside his doubts and go ahead with the awards. Even though he is unsure, the organizer goes on stage to announce the winners. The team that won first place in the astrology contest is Yoon from the Department of Theology and Han from the Department of Magic. When they hear the announcement, they celebrate happily. Yoon grabs Han's arm and joyfully says that she told him they would win. Han thanked Yoon for helping him identify an object in a box. He was grateful that everything turned out well. The hero learned that astrology involves math-based analysis of planetary positions, which makes it easier for him to study. On their way to the stage, Yoon joked that Han must be a genius and suggested he join the Department of Theology. Han appreciated the compliment but said he worked hard to get into the Department of Magic. After the award ceremony, the organizer gives out certificates and trophies. She tells Han that Si-hyuk wants to speak with him in private. Afterward, Han goes to a room and drinks tea. He wonders if Si-hyuk was originally in this episode. Han remembers that Si-hyuk is a supporting character who didn't get much attention in the original story. This leaves Han uncertain about what will happen next, especially since Si-hyuk often has bad intentions. Si-hyuk enters the room. Han asks him what he wants. Si-hyuk sits down and says he has some advice. Han is surprised because he expects insults instead of advice. Si-hyuk accuses him of using tricks to get what he wants. He warns Han not to be arrogant, saying he is too old for leniency now. Our boy is annoyed because things are going just as he expected. He wonders how old Si-hyuk thinks he is to act so full of himself. His arrogance matches his face perfectly. Frustrated, Han tells him to get to the point. Si-hyuk tells Han to stay informed about the Kastika family during summer vacation. Han is surprised and asks why this is coming up, but Si-hyuk won't explain. He says Han should follow orders if he is grateful for winning the competition. This annoys Han even more because Si-hyuk acts like he gave him the prize instead of considering that he and Yoon earned it. Si-hyuk ends the conversation and tells Han to leave. Han stands up and realizes Si-hyuk is kicking him out as soon as he is done speaking. A few days pass, and the first semester final exams finish, with vacation coming soon. Han throws aside a book about magical practices. He wants to forget about it. He has earned enough credits from the astrology competition, so he will skip Professor Grint's classes in the second semester. Adele walks into Han's room and asks how his exams went. Noticing the suitcases beside him, she asks about them. Han explains that he is planning to go home for the holidays. Curious, Adele asks if he is back on good terms with his family. She says it is great to see things getting better. Han doesn't want to share that he and his family aren't getting along, and that he will stay with the Kastika family. He remembers he is going home because of his older brother, Si-hyuk, who insisted on it. He then asks Adele if she is going home too. She replies that her family wouldn't be happy to see her, so she will stay in the dormitory. Han isn't sure if Adele is telling the truth because no one talks about her family, and she lives alone. While saying goodbye, he promises to see her after the holidays. After a smooth train ride home, Han arrives at a large white building. He is amazed by the wealth of the original Han, and wonders why he focused on dark magic instead of enjoying a peaceful life. Han bows to the butler and says he is back. The butler asks him to wait and explains that his father ordered him to deny entry without permission. Han thinks about how his father is treating him this way after a year and a half. The afternoon flies by, and before Han knows it, sunset is here while he's sitting on the steps by the entrance. A couple of maids walk by and notice he's still waiting there, surprised he hasn't moved on yet. One of them jokes about how determined he is, saying that she'd have found another spot by now. Just then, the door behind him swings open. He turns around hoping it's his dad approaching. He greets him and invites him inside. Han is taken aback, thinking it's a bit sudden to be let in like this. Inside the giant mansion, Han is sitting at a table that's about the size of his entire dorm room. Count is going on about how he heard the Minister of Magic is in some kind of scandal and wants all the juicy details. Han figures out that's why he was left outside. His dad thinks he's mixed up in it and is punishing him, even though Han hoped his better grades would lighten the Count's mood. But honestly, that's just classic Count behavior. Han thinks it's funny how his dad is always quick to catch the latest gossip, but totally clueless about other things, and he can almost guess where the info came from. Han quickly glanced at a servant who flinched in fear. That reaction made him realize that the rumors about him were getting twisted. When Count was shocked by Han's words, Han added with a bit of cheekiness that it made sense for a dad to be curious about why his son stopped by the Ministry of Magic. At that, Count shot him a sharp look and asked if he really thought he could lecture him. Han feels a bit nervous under that intense stare. It's no wonder people call his dad the bloodthirsty Count. Trying not to make things worse, he tells his father he's sorry for letting him down, but explains that he was at an event at the Ministry of Magic. Han shares that he was there representing his school and asks a servant to pass a piece of paper to his dad. Count was visibly shaken as he looked at Han's report card with all those high rankings. He had a feeling it was fake, so he asked Han about it. Han explained that cheating in practical exams was pretty much impossible, and even mentioned that his final results were even better. In a fit of frustration, Count crumpled the paper and called Han a troublemaker who finally showed what he was made of. With tears streaming down his face, he expressed how proud he was, leaving Han completely blindsided. It felt like a dramatic turnaround for Count's character. Suddenly everyone around him, servants who used to overlook Han, started noticing him. Han wasn't just the neglected kid anymore. He had the Count's backing, setting him on the path to a promising future. A couple of days later, Han realized Si-hyuk was right. He really should head back to the family estate for the vacation. While sipping tea in the garden, Count asked if there was anything Han wanted to learn. Han mentioned he was interested in horseback riding, so Count had a servant get 10 horses ready. When Count asked if Han needed anything else, he asked for some finely crushed high-quality gemstones. Han knows it's almost time for the Terra egg to hatch, so he gets the food ready just right. After tweaking the temperature, he wraps everything up perfectly. With all the prep done, the hatching should go smoothly. While hanging out with the egg, he thinks about how it's rated A grade. Terras might not be the best fighters, but they're amazing for getting around and become super loyal once you tame them. On the flip side, they're trickier to tame than dragons. Han finds out it takes about 1 or 2 weeks to train a freshly hatched Terra, and if you don't train them, they can cause a lot of chaos. As Han reads, he notices the egg starting to tremble and worries as it starts shaking more violently. Suddenly, it cracks open and there's an explosion that fills the room with smoke. Han waves the smoke away while holding his wand, confused about how he ended up with a Class A monster. Through the haze, he spots a baby Terra crying and floating in the air. Han unleashes a golden spell to stop the Terra from making a run for it. The moment it hatches, the little monster is ready to bolt. Even with the magic holding it back, it cries louder than Count did when he caught sight of Han's grades. Exhausted, Han slumps on the floor and realizes just how strong a newborn monster can be. If this Patera breaks free, it could create total mayhem. Normally, Han can tame most monsters with his magic skills, but this Terra is giving him the cold shoulder right from the start. Han figured it was better to calm the jittery Terra with a hypnosis spell instead of a sleep spell. He aimed his wand and let the spell fly. Slowly, the creature started to relax and Han was relieved it worked. He held onto the calmer Terra and tried to build trust by making it feel safe. Han taps into his past experiences to calmly pet the Terra and help it chill out. He knows it's going to take some time, so he spends the whole week working on taming it. With summer vacation giving him plenty of free time, he really dedicates himself to the task. When he finally pulls it off, everyone is blown away. His roommate can't believe it and says it's insane since even the pro tamers usually only handle 3 monsters. Yet here is Han with 2 tamed already, including the tricky Patera. Han tells his roommate to chill out and points out that they're actually there for something else. Standing in front of this huge sphere, his roommate suddenly remembers they're about to sign up for their classes. Even though they're just there to sign up for classes, one can't keep his excitement to himself and has to share the news. Han is all for it, so one hands him a well-organized class schedule. Han gives a thumbs up while Wan winks and wishes him good luck. It just so happens there's a big crowd at the registration spot. At Ardell Academy, course signups happen at a specific time and place known as the Magic Center. To register, you needed to find a spot with a special magical circle. You had to draw your own circle to log in and complete the entire process. The tricky part was that the magic centers moved around a lot. The day before, our hero got a voice message reminding her about the registration. It said that different centers had various strengths of magical flow, and suggested meeting at a place with a strong flow that a senior recommended. This race to find the best magical flow is pretty much like trying to snag a decent Wi-Fi signal these days. When Han shows up at the spot, he quickly realizes that the magical flow is actually really strong. The whole process of course registration this semester makes sense now because everyone is trying to avoid Professor Grint. Standing next to Han, Wan tells him there are just 10 seconds left until the Magic Center opens. A countdown begins, and just as it hits 0, all the other students receive a notification. The Magic Center for course registration is live. Everyone starts clicking away to get to the registration page and scrambling to find the classes they want. Han rolls his eyes as he watches students fumble with course selection. After 6 years at the academy, he knows exactly which classes to grab and finishes up super fast. Once he wraps up his schedule, Wan admits he kinda panicked and ended up with Professor Grint's classes. He asks Han how he pulled it off so smoothly. Han grins and says he snagged all the best courses. Wan is clearly impressed and calls it the ideal schedule. Curious, he asks if Han practiced for this, and Han smirks, saying his years in a gaming cafe totally prepared him for it. Wan starts to worry about Han's response, feeling totally confused by his vague words, and asks him to clarify. Even after the crazy course registration event, the story just won't give Han a break. As soon as he gets back to the academy, he gets a notification letting him know it's time to kick off the 4th main episode. This episode is all about the necromancy dorm. The clock keeps ticking until the dark mages are defeated, and if you win, you get the staff of Ardell. There's no room for failure here. Han remembers that the whole mess started when some students from the necromancy department got messed up by dark mages and ended up summoning skeletons on campus. What was supposed to happen in 2 years got moved up because the dark mages just couldn't get it right before. In the original story, this event caused many casualties, which made Han tense when he first read about it. Thankfully, his knowledge of divine magic from his theology studies helps, and with a group of heroes who have that savior complex vibe backing him up, they manage to sort things out easily. The 4th main episode wraps up quickly, and Han scores the staff of Ardell. It's a solid staff with a unique aura that lets the user cast multiple spells at the same time. People really seem to let their guard down at the worst times. When Han checked his class info, he was totally shocked to find out that his basic flight skills professor was Grint Butler. After all the effort he put into avoiding this guy, now he's stuck in his class. Frustrated, Han just moans and throws his hands up while Wan chimes in saying he looks completely lost again. Time flies, and before you know it, the students are on trains heading to camp. This camp is a classic event for second years at Ardell Academy, where they head out of the Ardell Empire with their seniors. The whole camp is all about survival training. This year's camp is happening at Keisha Plains, which is a really green and chill spot. Han can't help but sigh when they're dropped off in the mountains for survival training. It totally feels like he's on some YouTube survival show. As he's hauling his luggage, he hears the announcement telling everyone to gather up after getting off the bus. The professors mention that this setup is meant to help students mix from different classes, but honestly, it hardly ever works out. Second-year students have to tackle missions while the seniors keep an eye on how they're doing. They can rack up bonus points for their grades, so there's no way to blow off the program. But it also gives seniors a chance to make life tough for the juniors. One senior Kasan, who's in his 3rd year, tells everyone to stand up and warns them to move fast if they don't want their grades to drop. He says the juniors are totally unprepared and reminds them that it's the usual deal for them to get blankets and survival kits ready for the seniors. Adele is really confused and asks how they're supposed to get by without their food kits. Kasan loses his cool and yells at her to shut it, saying this is just how things worked back in his day. He calls her out for being disrespectful to an elder, claiming that kind of attitude just isn't cool. Kasan pointed at the students in front of him and ordered them to hand over all their food and anything useful from their backpacks. The students looked scared and quickly complied. Pleased with their response, Kasan told everyone to hurry up and warned them to keep acting like this, or risk getting lower grades and even being sent home. Han stood there not doing anything and feeling annoyed. Kasan noticed him and asked if Han was refusing to follow orders and if he thought 3rd-year students were a joke. Han grins and says he does, but adds that he doesn't mean it quite like that. He just thinks the seniors' antics are a bit amusing. Our boy gets that the 3rd-year student isn't a total jerk and has no valid reason to pick on the younger kids. But this year's 2nd years are something else, including all the main characters from the novel. Kasan probably feels frustrated dealing with these impressive newcomers. He can't help but mock Han, questioning how he has the nerve to act all high and mighty when he barely scraped by his 1st year. Kasan digs in deeper, asking if Han's newfound attitude is because of who his family is and whether his dad is being nice to him now after ditching him. Han can't get over how well his dad treats him, so he's not cool with what Kasan says. Kasan's fuming, but Han reminds him that the director talked about how teamwork matters before their trip. He warns Kasan that his actions are against that, and that the dean will probably call him in when they return. Kasan's so mad that he grabs Han's hands to grab him. But just then, Han's pet dragon jumps in and bites Kasan's hand, making him scream. Han quickly pulls his angry pet back while it glares at Kasan. With his hand hurt, Kasan gets sent to the medical office, and as he leaves, he threatens to get revenge if he gets a scar. Our boy is messing around, petting Basil's head and making fun of Kasan in his mind. Some 2nd-year students come over to Han and ask if they should start packing. Han steps up and tells everyone to gather their stuff and return to the tents. Meanwhile, in the 3rd-year tent, Kasan is venting about Han, but a student warns him not to push it too far and suggests he help hand out supplies to the 2nd years. Kasan isn't happy with our hero's potential success and spots the backpacks that Reveni is organizing. He asks if they're from Han's group, and when he gets the nod, he grabs a backpack and goes off on a rant about how Han needs to learn some respect for his elders. Kasan starts dumping the supplies, claiming Han doesn't deserve food or water. Reveni gets anxious and points out that 5 people can't possibly survive on just 1 bottle of water, wondering if Kasan's lost it. Kason then fires back, asking if Reveni is siding with the 2nd year. Reveni keeps stressing about the dwindling supplies, but Kasan just brushes him off, saying that's how he feels, and that arrogant people must experience some tough times. After messing up Han's group's stuff, Kasan hopes they'll have a rough go of it. The next day rolls around, and the students have to make it through 6 days without any issues to pass. If anyone gets seriously hurt or needs to head back to base, it's game over. Han's group takes a break in the forest, and one mentions that the supply backpack feels pretty light. They only found a water bottle, rope, photo, and absorption stone when they checked. Han gets annoyed and wonders how they're supposed to last 6 days with so little. Then he chuckles wryly, realizing it's really on him. Adele chimes in, saying trouble always seems to find her when she's around him, which feels a bit too coincidental. Han tells her to stop saying that and reminds her of all the good stuff she's picked up from him. Natalia and One jump in to keep everyone's spirits up and encourage the group to give their all. The group keeps moving and comes to a fork in the path. Han suggests taking the left route, but Juan raises an eyebrow and warns everyone to be careful since they're unfamiliar with the area. Han insists he's got this under control, but he's not mentioning that Professor Ernest had called him earlier to fill him in on some stuff. He also casually drops that he's read a book about the area because he found it interesting. Natalia gets all excited about what he said, and Juan gives him props for always knowing random facts. At first, Han thinks everything's on track, but by sunset, one person starts feeling dizzy, saying it feels like they're just going in circles. Someone else points out that the grass and trees all look the same. Han begins to get worried, questioning his choice to go left. Back at the tent, a guy named Reveni is worried. He asks Kasan if he took the monitoring stone from Han's group's backpack. When Reveni sees the stone in Kasan's hand, he tries to say it wasn't on purpose. He is sweating now because he knows he grabbed it while taking their food. He starts to panic and says he does not want the group to get lost. Reveni says the monitoring stone is very important because it is the main way students stay safe at camp. Without it, they will not be able to get help if something goes wrong. He wants to know what they're gonna do about it. Kasan gets annoyed and asks Reveni what he expects him to do. He's shaking at the idea that their group is strong enough to find their way back. He won't risk going back and facing the embarrassment of failure. So he decides to hang tight for 3 days and tells Revany to chill during that time. He's hoping the group sorts things out themselves to avoid trouble for both. The best outcome would be for everyone to get out safely without drama. The next night, Han gets a notification for the 5th main episode, The Secret of Survival. His mission is to uncover the campsite's secrets within a week. He sighs but feels excited because a main episode usually means something big is coming. But he can't shake off the worry since his friends haven't eaten properly since the mission kicked off. They've been walking all day and are wiped out. To make things worse, they realize they've been going in circles because of some illusion magic messing with the terrain. Our guy starts to think that the magical illusions aren't just some natural trick like a mirage. He can't shake the feeling that the academy wouldn't put its students through this kind of torture on a camping trip. Feeling frustrated, he wonders which of his enemies might be behind it all. While the other dudes are having a blast around campfires with all their gear, his group is just trying to make it through. As he's lost in thought, he sees Juan pointing to a cave. Adele notices and asks if they've finally broken free from the illusion. Juan feels hopeful, thinking they might be able to find a place to hide and start a fire to stay dry from the rain. But then, they hear a noise out of nowhere, and a huge boar with glowing red eyes walks out of the cave. That's when they all realize that the beast already claims this cave. The boar is just standing at the mouth of the cave, glaring at the group and snorting while stomping its feet, clearly telling them to back off. Han notices the boar's anger and opens his backpack to show off Basil, jokingly calling it a big pig. He asks if they can take the thing down. He tells Basil to go for it and the little dragon charges at the boar. Basil is young, but he is a legendary dragon who can handle most mages, so Han feels confident they will not have any trouble with a boar. Suddenly the boar knocks Basil back and sends him flying. Han's proud look disappears, and he's left wondering what happened. He rushes over to Basil, urging him to get back up. Basil looks a bit dazed and has a bruise on his forehead. Han encourages him to stand up again. Adele is quietly watching them before she shifts her focus to the boar. She pulls out her sword, thinking that Basil might not take this fight. Adele jumps in to take on the board from above. Her sword glimmers in the moonlight as she targets the beast's heart. She goes for the hit, but the blade bounces off its tough skin. Realizing something's off, she pulls back and figures out the beast must be magically boosted. One freaks out and asks how a creature like that even exists in the forest. Han's just as confused. With no other options, Han turns to Basil and asks if he's feeling better. He pushes the dragon to give it another shot. Basil looks hesitant, wondering why they should try again after the last failure. Han thinks they need to switch things up and suggests a technique they've been practicing recently. Basil perks up at the mention of the new technique. Usually his breath is used for wide attacks, but they've been training to focus it on a single spot. Concentrated strikes are way more powerful. Han didn't expect to put this to the test so soon, but he figured they might as well go for it. He tells Basil to show what they've been working on. The little dragon focuses and channels his new attack. Once ready, he unleashes flames mixed with lightning at the boar. The fire sparks attack completely engulfs the giant pig, reducing it to ashes. When the powerful attack fades away, the boar falls to the ground completely roasted. Natalia and One look at the boar and wonder if a baby monster could really hit that hard. Natalia gives a shout out to Basil and says he is not just any baby dragon. That makes the little guy smile big. At the same time, our boy asks the group if they can smell that. He starts drooling and gets all excited about having roasted pork for dinner tonight. Despite being the one who hunted the boar, he takes on the task of butchering it to prepare the meat for the group. He knows he's the only one in the group who studied anatomy and grumbles while cutting the pork. Feeling down, he can't help but think about how his studies led him to this whole butchering pig situation. Later, he heads to the campfire and asks if the food's ready. Natalia chimes in, saying Basil was the one who got the fire going. The group sticks the skewers of pork over the flames. As the pork starts sizzling, Han grabs a skewer and eagerly asks if they can dig in. Everyone happily agrees. One takes the first bite, gets emotional, and says he thought they were stuck, but now it feels like they're surviving. Han realizes they've been out all day without decent food or water, and he can only imagine how wiped out one must be. After they grab a bite, Han tells everyone to chill and offers to scout while the rest set up their sleeping bags by the fire. Later in the cave, Han starts mulling over their next moves. He figures the academy won't realize they're missing for a while, maybe a week before anyone starts searching for them. He's worried about running into more of those illusion traps or magic beasts like that boar they dealt with. Feeling a bit lost, he lets out a sigh. Adele comes over and asks what's on his mind. He wonders why she followed him, and she says she couldn't sleep. While Han's deep in thought, Adele points at the sky and suggests they look. There's this spot in the cave where you can see the starry sky, and shooting stars fall all around. She mentions that the stars remind her of something, and asks if he knows that magic reflects who a person is inside. As an earth mage and a commoner, She wonders if she's connected to the ground more than the sky. Then she asks Han why he decided to be a tamer, especially since it's not a very popular job. Han knows the real reason is that he was a vet in his past life and ended up in this novel, but he can't say that. So, he just throws out a lame excuse about wanting to chill and let others take charge. Adele teases him about why he always gets Basil to do things for him. After the joke, she shoots him a look that means something while Han thinks about how magic seems to find those who want it. It's just how the world works. This makes him wonder why Adele has such a strong ability, almost as strong as the main character in his story. Adele tells Han about her backstory and how she became a mage. She tells him that when she was a kid, the earth swallowed her whole village just like that. People started throwing around theories about a hidden black mage or some curse, but honestly, that didn't matter to her. What hit her hard was that all those innocent villagers vanished in a single day, and she was left all alone. Han finally feels like everything is clicking into place. He gets why Adele never talked about her family in the original story, why she doesn't have a place to go home during breaks, why she trains by herself, and why she feels like she has no other choice. But he also realizes she's way too impatient to hit her goals. Just as he's about to step in and lend a hand, he hears a weird cracking noise. Looking down, he notices a crack spreading out beneath him. The crack spread fast and pretty much covered the entire cave floor. Suddenly, the ground gives way, and they both go tumbling down. Han gets up, still feeling a bit woozy. Adele is already on her feet and starts talking about those weird lights they saw before they passed out. Han recognizes them and recalls the strange note Li-Han found in the secret passage. He asks Adele if she remembers that, pointing out how the lights look like the ruins from that spot. Adele jumps a little as she remembers how Li-Han came across it while looking for clues about the black mages at school. They both quickly figure out what's going on. As they look around, they spot one of the cubes stuck in the chest of a stone golem. Han reaches for the cube, but the golem shudders and makes him worry it might wake up. Adele hopes it will stay still, but the golem starts to move. Han complains about their bad luck with the boar and the golem. He tells Adele they cannot win and asks what they should do. Adele tells him to stop overthinking it and grab her hand, which makes him blush. When he hesitates, she takes his hand and says they are escaping. The ground suddenly juts up and launches them back to the cave, but they slam their heads on the ceiling before finally landing safely. Our boy grumbles about their rough escape and asks why they hit the ceiling when there's an opening nearby. Adele looks annoyed and reminds him that she's the one who saved him. As the golem shakes the cave, Adele thinks about the worst-case scenario. A golem that's been asleep for ages, just crushing everything after being disturbed, and the cave is about to go down. They start running while Han says her story sounds pretty believable. They run into Juan and Natalia by the campfire. One asks why the ground is shaking, and our guy tells him there's no time to explain as everyone needs to make a break for it. But then Adele stops everyone and reminds them they're still wrapped in that illusion magic. One looks worried and asks what they should do. Adele suggests they tackle it head-on and reassures herself that the golem should be slower than they think. As the golem charges at them, Adele throws out a stone rush and flings rocks at it. The rocks hit but don't damage, making everyone frustrated about what to do next. Han says thanks to her out of nowhere, catching Adele off guard since she feels like she hasn't done anything. He explains that her words gave him an idea. If her magic doesn't work, then Basil's fire stuff won't work since a golem powered up by magic would shrug off any hit, even a firestorm. Han reaches out to Natalia for some backup. She hesitates, saying her attacks aren't as strong as Adele's, but Han insists it doesn't matter. He asks her to hit the golem with some water magic. Adele chimes in, arguing that stone creatures usually resist water, but Han reassures her that it'll work and asks her to trust him. Even though she's a bit uncertain, Natalia follows Han's plan. She casts Aqua Blast and soaks the golem like it's having a refreshing shower. She feels it didn't do much, but our hero thanks her and brings out his new sidekick, Petrera. The little dragon chirps and flaps its wings, its golden eyes sparkling confidently. Adele covers herself and wonders about the sudden brightness. Then, a cold wave spreads out and freezes the drenched golem solid. Han shares his new plan to freeze what can be broken and shatter it. He manages to freeze the golem, which cracks and breaks apart. He explains how freezing water expands and can even break the toughest rocks. Just as he's feeling relieved that his plan worked, he suddenly collapses. The rest of the group rushes over and he reassures them he's okay, just a bit worn out from using his magic too much. Adele then warns them about footsteps getting closer. A moment later, Kasan and Revani show up and stare at the broken golem. Everyone feels a sense of relief, but Han looks at them, asking if anyone has something to say. Kasan shakes as he puts his hands together and says he's sorry. He owns up to his mistake and admits he didn't think things would get so out of hand. He insists he didn't take the stone on purpose and has been worried about everything. Han looks at him, trying to decide if he should punish him. After a long exhale, he shoots Kasan a fierce look and tells him to forget it this time. But then he suggests that maybe kneeling could help lighten the mood a bit. Kasan gets caught off guard and asks our boy what's going on, but our boy tells him to hurry up and kneel. Kasan reluctantly goes down on his knees and gives a half-hearted apology, admitting he messed up. Meanwhile, the Academy sends an emergency evacuation order with only a week left. The magic used to defeat the golem draws everyone's attention in the forest. Fortunately, everyone is safe, although the senior student may face consequences. Han considers investigating the sudden appearance of the wild boar and the golem, but is uncertain about how deep to delve into the matter. He pulls out the cube and shows it to Lee, who already knows about it and gives a nod to our boy for his hard work. According to the original story, the third cube shouldn't be where it is right now. It should actually be with the Black Wizards. Han recalls how it once belonged to them and was kept secret in the forest. Suddenly, the illusion magic, wild boar, and golem make sense. Lee notices strange energy in the forest and asks about illusion magic. Adele agrees, feeling something off. Lee remarks that such magic can't be cast from far away. Adele realizes that whoever cast the spell must have been hanging out somewhere in the forest. This stresses our boy out because the Black Wizards are getting closer. At this rate, the cubes and their lives are in serious trouble. Out of nowhere, our hero remembers the timing of the 6th main episode involving Ardel's death squad that is supposed to keep the cube safe from dark wizards. He figures that Lee was probably the one who originally set this group up. The problem with this episode is that the cubes are inevitably stolen by Archend, a mid-boss character. Archend is skilled in detection, theft, and pickpocketing. Being a master pickpocket means that no matter how many cubes they stash away, he can snatch them up quickly. With this new cube added to the mix, they have way more than they dealt for. It's just a matter of time before Archend makes his move. Han thinks it's time to wrap things up and Lee agrees, mentioning that Han probably needs some downtime. As he checks the status screen for the mission, he realizes he needs to bring 5 more people along. He definitely wants to take Lee, Adele, and Solia. Then he thinks about Natalia, who was the group's brains before, and Woon, who's always in Lee's corner. But for some reason, Yoon pops into his mind first. In the original story, Yoon doesn't find out about the cubes until at least 2 years later. But after spending time with her in dungeons and tournaments, he discovers she's brilliant. She's always at the top of her class in theology, and the professors keep an eye on her. He considers Seymour, who has a bad attitude and an unclear role in the group. Since our boy helped him escape the prison and revive the Dark Magic Club, he hasn't caused any trouble and is just waiting for Han's signal. Seymour had a lot of potential originally, but our hero can't take any chances with betrayal right now. He feels uneasy about assembling a team that strays from the original story, but knows he must prepare for a different outcome to survive. Han aims to identify people's skills early, involve them in the main story, and help them grow, potentially leading to a different outcome than the original. He's determined to trust his soul and organize the team. He also decides to conduct an experiment and heads to the Rocky Mountains. He entrusts the cube management to Lee, who impresses him by setting strong traps and barriers in isolated areas. Han finally finds the cubes safely folded away in the cave. After going through many struggles and close calls, he catches 3 of them. In the original story, the Dark Mages had 5 cubes to absorb magical energy. He knows this because he's read the book. These cubes give power, but they also take something. In the original tale, Lee gives up his sight to use the cubes in the final showdown. But our hero isn't planning to go that route. He finds exploring other uses for the cubes interesting, which are crucial to the story as everyone desires them. They may hold more significance than just being magic power batteries. So, our boy decides to try to tame the cube. It sounds kinda crazy, but he figured out why not. Taming is about communication, and he wants to chat with the cube. He tries talking to the cube but doesn't get anywhere. After trying several times, our boy realizes it's not working. But his pride as a tamer keeps him from giving up. He thinks back to the basics of taming by showing interest and communicating, just as it says in the first chapter of the beginner manual. He faces the cube again and demands a response, feeling like he's losing his grip but nothing happens. He remembers in frustration how things got better with Basil when he called it by name. Feeling silly, he names the cube Square because it looks like one. Then it hits him what he's doing. But out of nowhere, a notification says the cube's affinity has increased. Our boy is left shocked, wondering if this is for real. More notifications keep coming about the rising affinity, and he's confused about why this rock is suddenly answering him back. A notification on Han's screen asking if he wants to tame Squarey. He's totally stunned and quickly says yes. Then, another message tells him that Squarey has no thoughts and is just an inanimate object with 100 magic points plus a special transference ability. Our boy can't believe Squarey has 100 magic points, which is way more than Basil's 70. It hits him why sorcerers are so obsessed with cubes. But while he's wrapped up in that crazy number, he forgets something important. He's just blown away that he actually managed to tame a cube. From that point forward, the secret project to tame cubes begins, and the first cube named Squarey is under control in no time. But things get way trickier when he tries to tame the second one. The second cube's affinity increases very slowly, and this makes it frustrating, but he knows he cannot complain. With Basil, Closty, and Squarey backing him up, he's already leveled up more than the average tamer. If he gives up now, many tamers will be ready to throw stones at him, so he decides to just take it easy for now. The second cube is the Cube of Void, and once he starts taming it, he discovers that each cube has its own special skill. This one can create space by consuming magic, which is way cooler than just being a magic amplifier. Taming Squarey first was definitely the right move. He figures he'll keep the cube close to boost its affinity. With all the chaos from that follower's faction and the risk of stolen stuff, having at least one cube with him feels safer. Han's attention shifts to Basil, who unlocked a polymorphism that lets him change forms. But Basil can only change his color instead of changing into something cool. It makes him think his ability might not be that impressive. Then Basil shows he can only squeeze his jawline a bit. Han is left scratching his head, wondering how this is considered polymorphic when a dragon can only switch colors. It hits him that Basil can only make minor changes. He wonders if polymorph actually covers other stuff too. Since he'll be carrying the cube around, it'd be annoying if it stands out too much. So, he asks Basil to give it a shot. Basil is totally taken aback when he sees it but quickly turns it into a round ball, and that's how the second cube ended up being called Roundy. From that point onward, convincing everyone to join the Vanguard becomes tricky, and Yoon is the most difficult person to persuade. Han figures she'd be an easy sell since she's a good person, and has a solid connection with Lee. But then she starts rambling about creepy prophecies and how she doesn't want to stick around him, making the whole thing a drag. In the end, she comes around and decides to join anyway. As for Seymour, he's on board as expected, and seems he's looking to make up for his past with the Vanguard's help. With that, Han wraps up the 6th main episode without any major hiccups. As time rolls on, autumn comes around. One day, our boy is chilling with a book when Natalia comes over and is curious about what he's up to. She's got this adorable kitten in her arms. After he explains he's reading a library book, he's totally caught off guard by the sight of the little fur ball. Natalia tells him she found the kitten shivering in the rain by her place and couldn't leave it there because it reminded her of Basil. Han's confused about how a kitten can remind her of Basil since they're not even the same kind of animal. He starts thinking that maybe the idea of pets doesn't really click because cats and hatchlings seem to be grouped together in their world. Natalia is surprised to see the kitten nestling up to Han, especially since it took her days to get the little guy to warm up to her. Noticing the book in his lap, Natalia asks if she's interrupting and what he's reading. He says it's just something fun, not school stuff. He picked it up to learn more about artifacts since he'll be working with cubes. Natalia asks if he's into that stuff, commenting that it looks pretty complicated. Han agrees that it's kind of tough to understand. She offers to help and points to a section about broom classification. She explains how to make brooms for everyday use in competitions. Our boy is impressed by her knowledge. Natalia beams at the compliment, mentioning that her dad helped her make a broom. Our hero can't believe how close an expert is to him. Natalia mentions that the stuff in the earlier sections isn't too tough to make since they're just basic artifacts. She points out items like a dagger with a cool effect and a pricey potion. When she flips to the next page, Han gets on edge. That page has a description of a cube, but it doesn't have a name. He can't shake the thought that even if Natalia knows her artifacts, she probably doesn't know about cubes. Natalia mentions the cubes in the book, and Han is surprised that she knows about them. He instantly regrets asking because he realizes that not many students are familiar with them. She tells him she knows about cubes and wants to know how he knows about them, given that they're rare. Han flips the question back to her, asking how she knows. That's when Natalia drops the bomb, as her grandfather was the one who originally made the cubes. Han is totally caught off guard when Natalia mentions that her grandpa created the cube. After she shares what she knows, she asks how he learned about the cubes. He's torn about whether to spill the truth. He remembers that Natalia usually means well and tends to help out the main character, even if she's not directly involved in the main plot. It makes him think she probably won't misuse the cube. But he realizes he can't just hold back and needs more information about it. So he figures he should just come clean. He tells Natalia he actually has a cube. Her reaction is pure shock. She explains that her grandpa warned her the cubes were stolen and being used somewhere, and he told her to keep that down low. She's curious about how Han ended up with one of them. Han realizes that keeping the cube a secret from Natalia isn't a good idea. He figures it's better to bring her in on it, even if it means bending the rules about how many players there should be. He asks Natalia if she can share what she knows, telling her that dark mages are trying to grab the cube. She's totally on board and ready to help out. Natalia spills a bunch of details about the cube. She tells him it was originally made to generate power, and her grandfather had this cool idea to build a magic-powered train to replace the old steam engines. Han thinks the crazy advancements in science and technology around here come from the limits of magic and what it can't do. Magic-powered trains are one of those things that magic just can't pull off. Natalia talks about how pulling a heavy train takes a ton of magic, which makes it pretty much impossible. That's when her grandfather came up with this cool artifact with endless magic packed into a small core. Her family, the Wallows, has been making artifacts for ages. Her grandfather even traveled all over the continent to find the power source he had in mind. Eventually, he found a mineral that fit all the requirements. He ground these luminous stones with condensed magic to create just one cube. When he combined these stones, they showed some pretty unique abilities. Han thinks that each cube has its own special powers. When Natalia asks how he knows that, he can't spill the beans about taming the cube. He just plays it off and says it's a guess. Natalia mentions that the cubes should be controlled with some added rules and powers, but she's not fully in the loop since she didn't make them. She points out there's always a cost when they put rituals into any artifact. Even the smallest artifacts come with limits and demand a high price from whoever uses them. Han remembers the Cube of Souls, which can bring people back to life, but at the cost of the user's life. It hits him that the cubes were initially meant to be power sources, but that's changed. Sometimes inventions take unexpected paths such as Nobel's dynamite, which was meant to be a safe explosive, but ended up as a weapon of mass destruction. The same has happened with the cubes, twisted by the greed of mages. Han feels lucky to have learned so much about the cube. He thinks about how different things could have been if Natalia hadn't chatted with him on that bench, or if Yoon-ha hadn't stumbled upon that book about artifacts. He wouldn't have had a clue. As Han strolls through the academy hall, Yoon suddenly calls out to him when she spots the kitten in his arms. She jokes about whether it's a tiger or some other creature he's managed to tame. Our hero laughs it off and explains that it's just a regular cat. He tells her that Natalia found the abandoned kitten in the rain and has been caring for it, but it seems to have bonded with him. So Natalia asked him to watch it for a day. Yoon mentions how busy Natalia has been with her assignments. Our hero adds that just because he's a tamer doesn't mean he's a natural with animals, even though he's pretty good at it. When Yoon asks if she can hold the kitten, our boy teases that Yoon's loud personality might win over the cat just as she has tamed him. Once the kitten is in Yoon's arms, it quickly warms up to her. She laughs and asks if Han has managed to totally tame it. He feels embarrassed and tells her to cut it out with laughter. The kitten seems to really like Yoon, and she feels the same way about him. She asks if she can look after him, especially if he has no owner. Our boy thinks it's a good idea since he's always caught up in dangerous stuff. Yoon is a fortune teller and has a much safer gig. Plus, she mentions that Natalia was looking for someone to care for the kitten. Yoon gets super excited and hugs the kitten, saying they're now a family. Han tells her that Natalia has already picked out a name, Joy. Yoon thinks it's adorable and playfully lifts Joy up, promising to take good care of him. Han can't help but smile at this cute pairing of a fortune teller and a kitten. Suddenly, Han remembers that Yoon had been trying to find him. Yoon then explains why she was looking for him. She tells him she has some special news, and asks if he remembers his brother, Si-hyuk, from the astrology competition. She reveals that Si-hyuk is about to be assigned as an investigator for Ardell. After Han returns to his room, Adele tells him that Si-hyuk is now the new professor of magical manufacturing studies. She adds that he'll be teaching, working with the magic department, and doing his investigation stuff. Feeling worn out, Han asks how she knows so much about it. Adele explains that she's got a part-time gig as an assistant investigator, which surprises Han as he doesn't realize how busy she is. Then it hits him, and he asks why she's never brought up her part-time job with Si-hyuk. Adele thinks he should already know and wonders if she has to fill him in on everything. Han feels a bit speechless, admitting she's got a point. She doesn't have to explain everything, but he still feels a little out of the loop. He then asks if Si-hyuk has been busy with any cases. Adele says he has, mentioning that Si-hyuk's been looking into an unsolved case. She can't see the reports because students aren't allowed to access them, but she knows he's been on it for quite some time. Out of nowhere, Han hears a system notification pop up. He sees a new sub-episode assigned to him to help Si-hyuk figure out the mystery behind the Catablom case. Over in his office, Si-hyuk is going through reports about this case that has baffled everyone for years. A whole village mysteriously disappeared a decade ago. For Si-hyuk, the top prophet in the Ardell Empire, it's a tough nut to crack. He's got this prophetic magic that usually helps him see into the future, making it easier to dig up clues and solve cases way quicker than anyone else. That's why he's got a solid reputation and recognition from the Magic Bureau and the Empire. Still, despite all his skills, the Catablom mystery remains unsolved. The case is still a mystery because the Magic Bureau is trying to keep it under wraps. Si-hyuk usually avoids anything that might upset them, but he can't just brush this off. When he was a kid, he saw a prophecy that linked the Catablom case to things that might happen. Now that he's a professor at Ardell Academy, he's ready to dig into it. He's committed to discovering what really went down in Catablom 10 years ago, no matter what it takes. But he can't shake the feeling that discovering the truth might change him or turn everything he knows upside down. Han is thinking about this side story. He realizes that while the main plot focuses on the dark magic situation at Ardell Academy with all its risks and surprises, this side story drops in the Catablam case out of nowhere. He remembers that Catablam is probably where the girl Amenra talked about in the cave comes from. Adele used to really hate dark magicians because of the Catablam incident. She straight up killed Han when he became a victim of dark magic. This brings up some serious questions about why he died in the first place. Even though looking into this seems like a pain, Han is curious. He thinks he might pass along any helpful info to Adele. Still, he doesn't see a reason to get involved with Sehyok beyond their classes. Out of nowhere, Han hears someone say that Investigator Sehyok is looking for him. A woman tells him to head over to Sehyok's office, and Han can't help but wonder why Sehyok never seems to let him take a break. Once he's in Sehyok's office, Sehyok drops the bomb and says he'll be attending the royal feast. Han's completely caught off guard by this. He asks Sehyok to break it down for him. Sehyok clears it up, saying that going to the banquet is part of their investigation. Han checks out the report on the Catablam case, and Sehyok explains that he wants Han to gather data at the feast. Since Sehyok is well known, he can't just start asking awkward questions about a case from a decade ago. He figures Han is the perfect person for the job. After all, he can blend in without raising eyebrows, and he is also Sehyok's younger sibling. Han sees this as a win for himself and decides to take on the side mission. He asks if there'll be any dancing or partying at the banquet, and Sehyok tells him it's an imperial shindig hosted by the emperor. Sehyok also warns him not to draw too much attention or cause trouble, especially about grabbing adults by the collar if he gets mad. Han thinks it over and figures the warning makes sense. A few days later, Han and Sehyok show up at the royal feast in the evening. As he looks around, Han feels like he's stuck in a fantasy world. At the banquet, our boy spots the chocolate fountain. He figures the whole thing should be as flashy as you'd expect from an emperor-hosted event. He thinks being at gatherings like this is key to getting to know people. After spending so much time in a hospital or being buried in books, this feels like a whole new world for him. While he's lost in his thoughts, someone calls his name. It's Professor Miller. He mentions that it's not every day a regular student gets to come to places like this and asks why Han is here. Our hero explains he's helping Sehyok with an investigation. When Miller asks what it's about, Han brings up the Catablam case and checks if the professor knows anything about it. Unfortunately, Miller doesn't have any info. Thinking about digging deeper for answers, Han realizes the professor is clueless. Then Miller asks if he and Sehyok are close. Han finds this odd but answers that he's not sure, though he respects Sehyok and thinks he's someone worth following. The professor sees that Han has some serious talent, but warns him to be careful. He points out that diviners can have shady sides and suggests not to trust them too much. Miller jumps in, saying it's just the ramblings of an old guy and to take it with a grain of salt. Han thanks him for the heads up, promising he'll keep it in mind. The professor heads out, hoping Han has a good time at the banquet. Han wonders why the professor brought up Sehyok out of nowhere. Suppose even someone like Miller, who's well-respected and connected, knows nothing about it. In that case, he starts questioning who else he can contact. Scanning the room, he sizes up people based on their looks since he doesn't know anyone there. He looks for someone who seems important and has a good vibe but isn't too intimidating. Just then, someone puts a hand on his shoulder from behind. A young woman chimes in, saying that a place like this isn't much fun when flying solo. She notices that Han looks lost and asks why he's alone here. Han realizes she seems important and isn't giving off bad vibes. He's taken aback when she calls him by name and wonders how she knows who he is. The woman asks if he's Count's son while mentioning he probably doesn't remember her face. Our hero figures she might be a friend of his dad's, and it turns out he's right. She comments on how much he's grown up and asks if he came with his brother. It strikes him as strange since most people don't know Sehyok is his brother. But hey, it makes sense if she's known them since they were kids. Our boy mentions he's here to help his brother with some investigation. The woman tells him not to waste a fun party on serious stuff and asks what kind of investigation he's involved in. He brings up the Catablam case. Instantly her smile fades and makes the vibe tense. She looks thrown off and he can tell something's up. He asks her again if she knows anything about it. She replies with a hint of sarcasm that it's funny he's the one asking, even if no one else is clued in. Han picks up on her tone and expressions, feeling sure she knows something. But she sticks to her story, saying she doesn't know anything. Then she shifts gears and asks if she can throw a question back at him. She asks whether the Empire would choose to save 1,000 uneducated commoners or him, a guy who hasn't even graduated yet. Han is confused about why she's even asking that. She turns the question around, asking if taking him out could save 1,000 regular folks and who the Empire would pick. Han thinks it over and figures they'd go for saving the 1,000. After all, those people could farm, trade, or even fight. So it makes sense to save them. He starts to wonder if his value matches up to 1,000 lives. The woman confidently jumps in and says he's short on that. Han feels a bit irritated hearing that from someone he barely knows. He throws it back at her, asking what she thinks her worth is. She boldly says that the Empire would still pick her, even if it came down to 10,000 people. Han is impressed by her confidence. She tells him to let go of the case, saying that focusing on it will not do him any favors in the long run. He can't help but wonder if there's a link between the 1,000 people and the case. He remembers reading in the case report that around 1,000 people died in the Catablom incident. The woman seems to know something about it, as her words and vibe make him think that's true. She says he's not special enough to be saved by over 1,000 regular folks. But honestly, their lives don't mean much either. For the Empire, it's a no-brainer if they can stop dark sorcerers by sacrificing these so-called lower beings. Our boy now understands why Adele is so scared and disgusted by the nobles. They treat human lives like they're nothing. He forgets about this attitude at Ardell Academy, where social status isn't a big deal. The woman tells Han to quit following his lowly brother and focus on his studies. Han finds that pretty gross and isn't shy about it. She looks surprised by his response. He keeps asking what makes her think she can talk so casually about people's lives. A guy shows up in the middle of their chat, looking for her. He grips about how she bailed because the nobles were boring and how hard he's been searching for her. When he gets closer and starts talking to the woman, Han is thrown off. It hits him that she's the Emperor. She laughs and mentions that Count's son has been quite the entertainer. Han is totally at a loss when he realizes that the woman he's been chatting with is actually the Emperor because she is the top dog of the Empire. He feels this heavy wave of regret wash over him as he remembers everything he said. He can't believe he actually talked to her that way. She looks at him again and asks if he thinks it's better to save 10,000 citizens or just her by herself. After the banquet, Han and Si-hyuk sat side by side in front of the Emperor. She addresses Han and asks him to advise her whether she should cut off his arm, leg, or head. Despite everything going on, Han keeps his head up and stares right at her without bowing. This just makes her even more curious about Count's kid. But really, Han is scared out of his wits, hoping she won't go after him. In his past life, he worked himself to death, and now he feels like he might end up facing execution. He's even thinking about whether he should just start kneeling and begging for forgiveness. In the original story, Emperor Linnea wasn't that important, but her character in the book was so memorable that it stuck with everyone. She was shown as this unbeatable ruler who'd happily sacrifice thousands just to get what she wanted. In other words, she was a total tyrant and a bit of a madwoman who was ready to kill anyone whenever she had a whim. Han suddenly realizes he's really messed up in front of someone so powerful. Just as he is about to speak and call her His Majesty, Si-hyuk cuts him off. He starts apologizing and says Han is still just a kid. He has no idea what disrespectful thing Han did, but he is begging for another chance. Han cannot believe it because Si-hyuk, who usually cannot stand him, is actually standing up for him this much. Han knows that if Si-hyuk slips up, it could cost him his life. The Emperor thinks about whether she'll actually give Han a chance to survive. Si-hyuk makes a wild request and asks that if she decides to execute him, she should do it quickly so he doesn't have to suffer. Startled by this, Han starts to rethink what he thought about Si-hyuk being nice earlier. The Emperor bursts out laughing and decides not to kill him, at least not for now. She finds him too entertaining. She orders for an hourglass to be brought over. When it arrives, she flips it and gives Han 3 minutes to convince her why he deserves to live. A wave of anxiety washes over him at this announcement. He checks his neck to make sure it's still attached for at least the next 3 minutes, struggling to come up with a way to talk his way out of this tight spot. Having already messed up in front of the Emperor, he feels completely lost for words. As 2 minutes tick by, Han is still scratching his head in confusion. A status window pops up about this sub-episode, leaving him wondering if it's some kind of joke. But he knows this window always shows up when he's in danger. This time, it doesn't give him a straight answer, but rather hints that he should help Si-hyuk with the investigation. Realizing he needs to say something fast, Han claims he should live because he's an essential asset to Ardell. The Emperor shoots back, asking if there aren't loads of other talented people in Ardell. Han argues that he's smarter than the rest, but she counters that there are definitely people who outshine him. Getting frustrated, Han tells the Emperor to stop picking at him since he only has 2 minutes left. He says he'll explain it all slowly. This makes Si-hyuk nervous, worrying about how the Emperor will respond. Unable to gather his thoughts, Han presses on. He mentions that from their short chat, he's already figured out the details of the Catablom case. This grabs the Emperor's attention. He explains that the case isn't about dark mages cursing Catablom. Since Adele mentioned that the Emperor dismissed the commoners and buried her village over a mix-up about dark magic, Han puts 2 and 2 together and concludes that the villagers weren't cursed, but buried on the Emperor's orders. He figures that Si-hyuk couldn't have come up with this idea. The investigation papers claimed they had no choice but to bury supposed cursed villagers. But despite Si-hyuk's thorough digging, there wasn't any proof that the villagers were actually cursed. Han thinks that if the answers aren't clear, it's worth questioning the whole idea behind the case. He insists that none of the villagers were cursed and that the emperor must have had a specific reason for ordering the burial. Sacrificing those lowly beings for some purpose wouldn't have been an issue for her. She also mentions that Han remembers this clearly. He asks if there are any records in the Empire's logs that would show such a direct command from the emperor. He suggests that someone close and trustworthy, like a major noble with a solid reputation, must have carried out the secret operation. Han hopes he's wrong but feels it's a real possibility. He wonders aloud if their father, Count, could have been the one leading the operation to bury an entire village. The emperor pauses and then asks how he knows this. Han replies it's just a hunch. He picked up on her strong interest when Count's son asked about the case. He believes the whole incident was kept super confidential within the magic department, and that even the documents were probably faked. Now he gets why this subquest dragged him into this, because the emperor is the mastermind behind it all. In just 5 minutes, Han pieces everything together. He challenges the emperor, asking if she still thinks there are more talented people in the empire than him. But knowing better than to back her into a corner, he quickly adds that he could have found out even more if he had another 5 minutes. He wonders if her curiosity might be leading him in the right direction. The emperor pauses to think about Han's words. She's impressed by his courage and honesty, which is why she decides to spare his life. As a reward for speaking so boldly, she hands Sehyuk the case reports. Inside the envelope is confidential info, and she tells him to handle it however he sees fit. Sehyuk promises to comply, and she tells him to go over the details in private. Next, the emperor tells our boy to open a box with a fountain pen she's gifted him. Han can't believe the outcome of her meeting with the emperor, and she thinks that feeling grateful is the right response to getting a gift. He eventually thanks her, and she points out that Count has raised his child in a very risky way. She asks Han why he thinks she gave him the fountain pen, almost like it's a riddle, clearly enjoying watching him piece it together. Our boy guesses that the pen is meant to inspire him to hit the books more seriously. He starts to think the fountain pen might be some kind of rare artifact since it comes from the emperor. He figures it's a tool for capturing dark mages, and as it turns out, he's right. The emperor comments that with his sharp words, he'll definitely find a reason to use it and reminds him to keep it safe. The next day at Count's mansion, he expresses how grateful he is for the praise the emperor gave his son. He asks Han what went down. Han explains that he just went to the banquet to help with his brother's investigation, but didn't recognize the emperor and spoke without thinking. Count freaks out, realizing that his son's neck is still attached despite his slip-up, but our boy brushes it off cheerfully. Then he brings up the investigation, realizing Sehyuk is still pursuing it. Count asks if he got any info after meeting with the emperor, which he did, kind of. Thousands of innocent people ended up dead because of the emperor's orders, but the details weren't recorded, leaving the case unresolved. Still, Sehyuk believes there's more to uncover. He mentions that there's a truth about the case that only he and the emperor know. He opens the envelope from the emperor, recalling her words that there's something important for him to see inside. He feels a bit anxious since the case has been a closely guarded secret for a decade, and the contents look different from the investigation file he's used to. The report states that a dark mage named Nox infiltrated the Catablom area. Nox had a unique ability to remain hidden and disguised himself among the villagers. Since identifying him was difficult, troops were sent under Arcanet's command, but they all perished. Troops deployed under Castika's command also failed. The report suggests that Nox was casting a wide area spell using the villagers as sacrifices. If left unchecked, greater damage would have been inevitable, so the Empire had to make a choice. They chose to bury the 1,000 villagers alive under Count's command to ensure the safety of countless others. Sehyuk is hit with a wave of disgust after learning the whole truth. He feels this revulsion bubbling up but tries to keep a level head about it. At first he thinks there couldn't possibly be any survivors since the whole village was buried. But as he goes through the report, he finds out there were actually 2 survivors. He can't believe it and finds it a shock. One of those survivors is a girl named Adele Stivia. Sehyuk remembers her as his assistant from Ardell Academy, and it all clicks, so now he gets why she became a mage. But this makes things really complicated. She's lost everything, including her home and her family and her parents. He worries about what might happen if she discovers the truth about what went down. He knows he can't let that happen. As he looks for the identity of the other survivor to burn the reports, he spots the name and immediately feels a rush of fear, so he drops the papers. Meanwhile, Count tells Han that he never intends to take part in the Catablom operation. He thought that Nox, being the sly dark mage, could be handled by others. But then a prophecy came out claiming that someone from the village would grow up to kill Count's son. Feeling like he had to step in, Count took charge of the operation and found a crying child who had survived. Terrified that this kid might actually grow up to harm his son, he wiped the child's memory. It was the perfect way to keep an eye on the kid, so he took him in and named him Han Sehyuk and raised him as his own son. Han asks his dad if he regrets what he did. Count says he does, but not for destroying the village or killing innocent people himself. Instead, he regrets not taking out the 2 survivors who could come back to hurt his son later. He calls that his biggest mistake. Our boy can't believe it, wondering how someone could even think that way. Count tells him it doesn't matter if he thinks he's to blame. He'd make the same choice again if he had to. Count really believes it was the right move, but our hero thinks it was the worst. He points out that what seemed like the best choice back then looks terrible now. Count responds that he's not a prophet and didn't know how things would turn out. Then he pulls out a sword from the cabinet and hands it to our boy. The sword is known as the Sword of the Earthwaves, a powerful weapon that reacts to desperation by wreaking havoc on the earth. It's the same sword that ended up burying Catablam. Han is puzzled about why his dad is handing him the sword, since he's not into weapons. Count explains that he needs to take it because there might be a time when he'll really need its power. He also advises Han to steer clear of Sihyok and Adele. As our boy gets the sword, he hesitates for a second. He figures Sihyok has probably already figured out the truth from the Emperor's documents, and trusts that Count is keeping an eye on things to avoid trouble. But he worries more about Adele. He thinks about having a heart-to-heart with her, but quickly decides against it. Adele is really pushing herself to get stronger, and if she finds out everything is connected to Catablam, she might go for revenge. Our boy realizes he can't tell her that the Empire buried her family. He understands he has to wait until she's ready to face the truth. So, he figures the only choice he has left is to keep lying to her. Once back at Ardell Academy, Han takes the sword to his room. He remembers being warned to keep the sword off the ground to keep its power intact. Even though it's weaker now, it can still take out a whole dorm if he's determined enough. He thinks about how this sword has already been responsible for 1,000 deaths. It makes him wonder why he should bother polishing a weapon that's meant to be shiny and clean when it's already soaked in blood. Out of nowhere, Wan shows up in the room and calls out to Han. He asks if Count figured out what's going on since he got dragged into Kastika's territory, but Han just brushes it off. Wan hands him a note from Adele, which says she misses Basil and wants him to bring the dragon to the dorm that night. Our boy feels a bit thrown off, thinking maybe she's just using Basil as a cover to see him. He asks Basil if he's going to see Adele and starts to doubt if the little guy is really a dragon. Later that evening when they get to the dorm, Adele lights up when she sees Basil. She scoops him up and cuddles him, while our hero thinks she's really only into Basil. As he's about to head out and thinks she's already seen the dragon, Adele stops him. She invites him to go with her to the Cherry Blossom Festival at the village square. Han is left confused, wondering if there are even such festivals in this world. At the festival, they're checking out the gorgeous cherry blossom trees. Adele can't help but comment on how beautiful they are. She says she missed the festival last year because of training but was really looking forward to coming this time. Han asks her if she enjoys this kind of thing, and she flips the question back at him, wondering why she wouldn't. He jokes that she might be the type to pull up trees by their roots. He actually thinks the festival is a good fit for her and finds it pretty cute. But then he gets a bit flustered, thinking about how cute she is, and starts slapping himself, questioning if he's losing it. Adele notices and asks what he's doing. Our boy says if she catches a falling cherry blossom petal, her wish will come true. She gets super excited and starts trying to catch one. He's left wondering how he's supposed to keep a straight face. His mind drifts to how devastated she'd be if she found out that her hometown was wrecked and buried because of his dad. Even though she seems tough, he knows she's actually pretty fragile. If she discovers the truth, she might end up blaming herself for not spotting her enemy sooner. The connection they have now feels like a noose tightening around him. If he'd stayed out of the picture, Adele could have dealt with the bad guy and gotten her revenge without getting tangled up in this mess. But now, it's way too complicated. Adele finally catches a cherry blossom petal and excitedly shows it to our boy. All cheerful, she brings it over and he asks what her wish is. Looking at her, he can't help but think about how different things might have been if the whole Catablam incident hadn't gone down a decade ago. Adele tells him her wish is a secret. Han reflects on how he wouldn't be stuck living so desperately if that event had never happened. Adele asks if he's not going to catch a petal and make a wish. But for our boy, everything feels like it's in ruins. He tries to say something but can't find the right words. Finally, he calls out to Adele and tells her he has something to share. But that's where the season ends.